What's up, everyone? This is Anthony Pompliano. Most of you know me as Pomp. You're listening to Off the Chain, simply the best podcast in crypto. Let's kick this thing off. Sriram Krishnan is a longtime friend and currently focused on more writing and investing in early-stage companies. We previously worked together at Facebook, where we both led product teams, and Sriram later went on to be a senior product lead at both Snapchat and Twitter. In this conversation, we discuss his time growing up in India, how he met his wife on Yahoo Messenger, what he learned from Mark Zuckerberg, Evan Spiegel, and Jack Dorsey, why organizations are systems, where his obsession with memos came from, and who the greatest basketball player of all time is. This conversation was a lot of fun, and we dug deep into a number of fascinating topics that I think you will enjoy. All right, guys, bang, bang. I have a special treat for you today. Sriram is here. We were just joking about he is the only person that has worked at two companies that I've worked at, and I think he's the only person that I directly worked with at Facebook that's been on the podcast. Those were very fun days, so we got a lot to talk about. Thanks for coming to do this.
Thanks for having me, and I hope your audience is prepared for all the embarrassing Pomp stories.
I don't know if there's any of those, but we'll see. All right, you've got probably one of the most fascinating stories in technology that I know of. You were born in India, and then you end up working at Facebook, Snapchat, and Twitter, all in pretty important leadership roles. How do we get from India to Silicon Valley?
I
Other than to get on a plane at some point.
I just got lucky a bunch of times. It's really hard. I think sometimes when you look at this post fact, you build a narrative for yourself and you try and connect the dots. But each of those was random and serendipitous. Like a lot of people, I was born in Chennai in India. It's a sleepy little city in the south of India, which not surprisingly has a lot of tech people coming from it. Like Sundar is from there. There are many other folks from there. Convinced my dad when I was in high school to buy me a computer, which was a fairly big deal for him. It was expensive, and I had to convince him that it would be productive. And I taught myself how to code. I was not very social. I just kind of sat at home every single night, and we couldn't really afford dial-up internet most days, so I would just open up like a Visual Basic book or a C++. I just taught myself how to code. Really liked it, and once I went to college, I would start writing things online, and I think I was lucky to be the recipient of multiple big breaks, which just happened to me serendipitously. And in college, I had my first big one where, I think the biggest one was I met my now wife back all the way back in college. We've known each other for 17, 18 years now. And I'm going to tell you a sentence which doesn't mean what you think it means. We met online. And the story is not because we swiped on each other. Back in 2002, we had a friend who wanted to build a website. He did not know how to write code. He added the two nerdiest friends he knew on Yahoo chat room. So this really tells you how old this story is. Back when Yahoo chat rooms were a thing, and we were supposed to build a site. The site never got built, but we would chat with each other every night from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. and we just chat. We didn't even know how each other looked like.
And you guys had never met each other in person?
No, never. Didn't even have a photo.
And the two people were you and your wife?
Yes. And we just chatted every night. And after a year, we met in person, and that's how we became friends. So,
and where she was at the same school? Or?
No, she was in a different school. She was in a different city. We are from the same city, but she was going to school in a different city. And so we would just only interacting for a year. We had Yahoo Messenger. So, but back then, I was starting to write blog online. I would write about Microsoft technologies, and this is my first big break. Where at the time, Microsoft was launching Visual Studio Express, which was meant to be an edition meant for students. And what they would do is they would do this conference, and they'd send an exec, and they would do a keynote demo, and they would get a local student to come on stage and to compile Hello World, and to be like, ta-da! And now you as a student can use it too. But the Microsoft India team didn't really know many students at the time. And because of some stuff I had written online, somebody sent me a cold email from Microsoft saying, hey, would you like to come over to Bangalore and then do this thing? And at the time, I was, sitting in my bedroom in Chennai. I'd never been on a flight before. I was like, this sounds great. Of course. And I went and did this demo for this VP. And at the end of it, and my now wife, Aarti, but she was also there. And he said, you kids should come work at Microsoft. I was like, well, great, but we live in nowhere land, and you might have been in a different galaxy. Yeah. And long story short, he put us in touch with recruiting at Microsoft, and we became product managers there. So
okay, so when you first get introduced to the recruiters at Microsoft, are they immediately vetting you as potential employees, or is there like you guys are like, hey, how does this work? Like,
we had a weird experience because the exec we met, who's Soma Segar, who's now a fantastic VC at Madrona Ventures. He actually invested it. He actually put in money in my wife's company 10 years later. So it kind of brings his story full circle. He didn't know who to send a couple of random kids to. It was not his purview. So he put us in touch with, the folks who do a lot of these sort of senior people recruiting or exec recruiting at Microsoft. And so we kind of had this weird alternate interview loop. I think at the time they were not really hiring many product managers or program managers Microsoft called out of college. So we kind of had this bizarre loop where they went like, oh, we don't really know what to do with these two. Let's get them in. And then they hired us. And so that's kind of our big break into tech. So got into Microsoft and
in India or coming to Seattle?
In India for a short time, but flew to Seattle a couple of years in and have been in the US ever since. And for the first 5 years of Microsoft, I worked mostly on cloud computing. So before Windows Azure was named Windows Azure, it was this side little skunkworks project for Microsoft, which was kind of a bunch of crazy data center distributed computing people. And at the time, I was really interested in distributed computing. I had written my own version of Paxos and the Byzantine general problem solutions, and I was really interested in this space. So I basically knocked on the door and I said, hey, I would love to work on this, whatever you want me to do. So I was very lucky to be there at the right time, right place. Joined as a PM, spent 5 years there on Windows Azure through the launch. It was a fantastic experience because you got to see this company be like, okay, how do we compete with Amazon? How do we build a cloud platform? Microsoft was fantastic, but both Aarti and my wife, Aarti and I, we loved Silicon Valley. Our first date was to watch I hope I'm not in trouble, a BitTorrented copy of Pirates of Silicon Valley back in 2002. By the way, still the best Steve Jobs movie of all time. And we were just these random kids, being like, someday we want to be there. I know it sounds like a cliche, but it was really true. And in 2011, we got our green cards and became permanent residents of the United States, which was a big deal. Because this meant that we could actually leave Microsoft and go do other things, start companies without a whole amount of paperwork, it was really hard if you were not a permanent resident or citizen. And so we left Microsoft, had a long chat with Satya, who I was working for at the time, and said, we're going to go do this thing. Came down to the Bay Area, and we looked at each other and we said, look, there are two of us. One of us should do the crazy startup, and one of us should get a job which pays a paycheck. So Aarti, my wife, is still the amazing founder and entrepreneur in the family. She went off to launch two startups, one of which, she went to Y Combinator. I believe she was either summer or winter 13. She launched this e-commerce company called Lumoid. They did a fantastic 5-year run. They sold a couple of years ago. She now, by the way, works at Facebook. But me, back in 2012, I was like, well, one of us, she's doing off there building a company, but she was kind of shipping box out of a bedroom and being really scrappy. And I should get a regular job. And I had a lot of friends who had gone from Microsoft to Facebook at the time. And this is a very interesting time for Facebook because Facebook had just gone public. And if you remember, the stock was getting crushed. I think they had IPO'd at around 50.
Down like 22 or something, 25.
Yeah, it was
right?
a disaster. It didn't even trade for the first few hours. And because I think, but the deeper question was people are asking where, look, all of your traffic is switching over to mobile. You could see the numbers, you could see the writing on the wall. Actually, the wall was already here, but all of your monetization was still dominantly
on web,
right? You know this. I mean, you were there. And so the big question that market had for Facebook was like, can you monetize mobile? Can anyone monetize mobile? Now, of course, when sitting here in 2020, this all sounds crazy and silly, but that was the big question then. And at the time, I told myself, look, Facebook, I want to work on consumer apps. I worked on data centers, but I want to work on regular consumer apps. And Facebook felt like they knew something which the rest of the world didn't. And I wanted to go learn that. And once I joined Facebook as a PM, I told myself, I know nothing about mobile. I know nothing about advertising. So let me go work in this space. So this was probably the second luckiest thing I ever did outside of the Microsoft job, because it was absolutely, early 2013, working on mobile ads inside Facebook was the perfect right time, right place. I just got very, very lucky.
Yeah.
You know this. You were there.
Well, and so a lot of people don't know the story because this isn't like the sexy story of Facebook through those years, but you joined in beginning of 13, give or take. I joined in the beginning of 14, and we both worked on the ads team, doing different things, but I remember going to meetings, and the people that I remember being in the room specifically are you, Michael Sharon, Mike Kudak, Boz, all these people who now have gone on to either do different things or continue to do great things at Facebook. And I literally remember looking around the room sometimes and being like, holy shit, right? Like there's a lot of smart people in this room who are the best in the world at what they're working on. And the story that I always tell people is the first time I ever saw an ads is going bananas sign inside. And so for those that don't know what that means, if you think of the shape of a banana, it looks like every startup graph, right? It just goes up and to the right. Well, the thing at Facebook was it was literally growing so fast in terms of ad revenue, the mobile ads, et cetera, that literally it looked like it was bending backwards on itself, right? It was just explosive growth. And so it's just a really cool thing to live through and kind of experience alongside so many great people.
It was, and honestly, it was each of these things you can only look back in retrospect and be like, well, I was very lucky. I could have joined a different company, I could have picked a different team, and I would have missed out. So, I can't claim I was, somehow smart. I just was in the right time, right place. But I think if you look back then, today Facebook ads seem like, this huge, dominant, amazing platform. But back then, on mobile ads on Facebook, we looked at Google and we were like, wow, we have this huge mountain to climb. And we were still building the basics. Right? We were still building the basics of targeting, the basics of measurement, the basics of how, the ad auctions worked. We couldn't even get ads to show up on mobile feed properly for a while. So it's interesting because I think now, Facebook is such it seems it's the incumbent in power. But back then it wasn't a given. We were just like a bunch of people and we knew everyone, a small group of people who
we all fit in a conference room.
Yes.
For the most part. Like Mike Kudak sat in the corner. I'm going to call him out right now. And he would sit up on the filing cabinet, right, with his microphone. And the other 25, 30 people would sit in the room and everyone, that was it.
It was. And, and I still think I probably learned the most interesting lessons in those few years at Facebook.
What were the lessons that you learned or took away?
It's interesting. So I have this, this weird trajectory because I've been in Facebook, Snap, and Twitter, which a lot of people think of as being similar in some way. And so I have this interesting trajectory where I've often seen the same decisions happen and see how they are discussed or talked about in 3 different companies.
And you may not say this, but I'll say this. You also have had the opportunity to work pretty closely in most cases with Satya at Microsoft, Zuck at Facebook, Evan Spiegel at Snapchat, and then Jack at Twitter. So it's not just, I worked at this company. It's these decisions are being debated at the highest levels of each one of those businesses, and you've been there to kind of see how those
goes. So, if you want to jump into that, I think, one thing I found is, when I was at Satya, I was like way junior, in the stack. But with these 3, one thing you realize is each of them are incredibly smart. In the top, if you talk to them, you quickly realize why they are in the position they are. But they're also incredibly different. And if you look at these 3 companies, one thing I realized is, one, there are many, many ways to build a fantastic, great company. And each company is a reflection of the founder and some of the core values that the founder holds dear. So let's look at Facebook. I think if you look at lessons from Facebook, I think there are many, but I think off the top of my head, and I would love to get your take on it, is one is optimizing for impact. Facebook probably over everything else will pick impact. So what does that mean? It means that in any decision you make, in any product decision or hiring decision or anything you do, you ask yourself, what is the most impactful way to go about this? For example, back in 2007, 2007, 2008, when Facebook was thinking of growing, there were many paths for them to grow. They had grown in the US, they could have picked a next country and gone after them. But at the time, the growth team looked at it and said, well, the most impactful thing for us to do would be to go after everyone who doesn't speak English. And that led to the creation of, the translation project that existed then. So it's just definitely a mindset of always asking yourself, what is the most impactful thing that you can do? I think that is one.
And that story was always interesting to me when we were there because they didn't start out with like what most companies would do. What would most companies do? They'd go hire a bunch of people who speak, Russian, Chinese, whatever languages. Instead, they just said, hey, we've got tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people using this site. Anybody who speaks Russian who would like to help translate our site from English to Russian, here's some tools to do that, right? And to go back to the impact, it was like, if you go and you hire, Russian translators and it's very kind of centralized and methodical, it's going to take a long time to get to the impact in terms of just kind of open sourcing to some degree tools that then allow people to help quickly translate the website. Now you get a bunch of different languages all at the same time and much quicker. And so it's not only just like where is the most impact, it's also like what's the straightest line to that input.
Which I think is the second part of what makes Facebook so effective is a focus on speed and iteration. Somebody at Facebook who's very senior once told me that he's never sure Facebook will get it right at first, but it's probably going to be the fastest at iterating and getting to the right answer the quickest. And I think you see this all the time where Facebook builds both technological and cultural machinery to focus on speed. So, when they launched this translation product, it probably wasn't perfect, but they knew they could make it better very, very quickly. Like we saw this when we did ads. When we launched, the original version of the Facebook ad products, it didn't have a lot of features that Google had or the competition had, but Facebook got so much better so quickly. And I think one of the lessons I learned there is I think it's very easy often to psych yourself out of launching something or to say, I'm going to wait until I get everything right. I understand every single like I and T. But Facebook was like, look, let's just go get something out the door, build the muscle to go execute and iterate very quickly, and you will wind up beating the competition. So I think it's a very particular mindset. Now it has its downsides, which I think we now sort of famously know, but I think that was like such a key cultural attribute for them.
Tell the story of the mobile ad network, because what you guys, when you guys built and launched that, it went from $0 to $1 billion in revenue in 18 months, I think.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So the backstory then is, Facebook at the time was trying to figure out. They had an interesting problem. They were in the ad tech world. There are these phrases that we use called being supply constrained and being demand constrained. And what this means when you're supply constrained is, you have a lot of people giving you money, but you don't have, enough space to show them. And if you're demand constrained, you have a lot of place to show these ads, but you don't have enough people giving you money. And Facebook went through this very interesting transition in around 2011, 2012. They had a lot of space to show ads in, but they didn't have enough people giving the money. They were demand constrained. So that's why they launched the bidder Facebook exchange. This is probably only interesting to this, the ad tech population in your audience.
They launched a lot of products to try to drive more demand.
Exactly.
Right? Hey, we have all this space, but no one wants to advertise yet. Let's do things to get a lot of people who want to advertise.
Exactly. But things changed very quickly.
They were very good at getting demand.
Yes. It turned out we were like, oh my gosh, we have a lot of demand and we don't know where to put the ads. And I remember, this like, probably 7-8 years later, so I'm probably going to get in trouble. At one time, we looked at some numbers and we were like, wow, we're spending less than 10% of the money that advertisers want to spend on us. Like people are basically like, I want to spend $100 with you. Facebook would only spend like $8 or $9 of their $100. And so there was this question of, well, how do you actually go show these ads? And you have to be smart about it because, the easiest answer would be to say, why don't you just show more ads to everyone? But, as we all know, like, the more ads you show, the more you risk annoying people, the more you risk, losing your best, most valuable customers off the platform. And so you have to figure out, well, if you want to show an ad, let us say for Nike, I'm a big sneaker person, so you want to show me an ad for Nike, you have to know that I'm really interested in sneakers, that it is a fantastic ad, and make that match the exact right time and space. So circa 2013, we had run out of space. We had shown all the ads we could in feed at the time, and we're trying to figure out what to do.
I remember literally being in those meetings, and Rob would say, winter is coming.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I remember that was the big mantra, which was essentially saying all of the ads were going into news feed, but there was only, every feed load, basically every time you refresh, it was like 6 or 7 ads. And they were sold out every time, and there was still more demand. There was it's like having a business with a line around the corner, and you're like, we got to have more supply because we got to feed all these people who want the food, right?
Yes, and so there was this hunt to go figure out where do we show these ads, and one obvious answer was well, why don't we show these ads outside Facebook? And this was not a novel idea. Google had ad networks have been around for a very long period of time. Google obviously had at the time the dominant market leader with Google AdSense, but we said, well, we should take a stab at it. And in the past, Facebook could not take a stab at it because they didn't have a line on the door, but now they did. So, and me and a few others, we kind of put this effort together. It's called the Facebook Audience Network, where we said, look, where is Facebook really strong? We're strong on mobile. We are strong inside apps. And we're also really good at showing ads which look and feel like they should fit within the app. Because ads at the time were these big banners which would kind of slide up or they would slide in, and they were annoying, they were not fun. And Facebook had really discovered how to show ads in feed natively, which felt a part of the experience. And we said, what if we can do that for everyone? So we built this team, and it was again right time, right place. We were able to scale it up very quickly because it turned out that there were a lot of people on mobile, publishers, for example, media companies who had switched over to mobile, but they were not making a lot of money. Or there were gaming companies who had some paying customers, but that wasn't enough to for the large amount of people who never pay. And we came in and we said, look, we have authentic people because we know who these people actually are, and we have a great set of advertisers, and these are ads which are not annoying to the people who use you every day. And so it's kind of this trifecta which worked really well. And again, it was one of the things where after the 6 to 8 months, it really took off. And I think at the time it still is really a market leader. So
but on day one when you guys launched, it wasn't hey, this is going to $1 billion.
It was terrible.
Right?
It's for months I think we didn't make any money at all. And at the time, we were wondering, is this ever going to be a thing?
Yep.
And so that's, I think, one other lesson from Facebook where these things never work on day one. You get the big press launch, you get the big announcement.
You're literally Facebook. You call up anybody and they write about it.
Yeah, and you can get any partner, but they never work, because you never seen it in action. You don't know how the machine learning is going to work or all the zillion bugs you hit, and you got to make it better. And I think that's another lesson I learned from Facebook, which is you have to grind it out. And it's the little things. One story I always keep thinking about is in every earnings call that Facebook would have, they would always ask what really drove revenue, and these analysts would always be looking for an answer of, well, we launched project X or product X and that made all this money. But the answer is never really that. The real answer is more well, we had 2,500 different machine learning model changes which each added 0.1% and they all compounded. But that's really hard to go explain, and I think that's kind of where I learned the hard work is never really in these flashy launches. It's looking at the data, launching something, and building the cultural machinery where it's okay to fail, okay to kind of experiment, iterate, and doing it again and again and again. I think that's one of the best things I learned from Facebook in that era.
Yeah. Alex Schultz, when I first got there, I could tell the story now because he would probably laugh.
I'm telling you all the stories now. I'm hoping
yeah. I hope they all listen and they
yeah, I'm hoping you indemnify me for this podcast.
So Alex sent me an email. I joined. I was taking over as the product manager of the growth team for Facebook Pages, and Alex is kind of one of 3 people who kind of really runs the growth team at Facebook. And so to most people in the growth organization, he was this guy up on this thing, but I was new and you said it, not me. And I didn't know who he was, right? And so I guess he had sent an email, and I just missed the email. And so my boss at the time walks over and he goes, "Hey, did Alex Schultz email you?" And I was like, "Who's Alex Schultz?" And he was like, "Can you check your email?" Serge, yeah, email. He goes, "You should probably respond to that one." So I responded, and he was so gracious, and he said, "Well, why don't you come in and meet me?" And I think we met for 30 minutes or something. And one of the things that he said to me in that very first meeting, which we were talking about kind of just grinding it out, he goes, "Look, most people don't realize, but growth is just a continuation of compounding wins, right?" And it was this idea of don't go try to find a 10%, increase in click-throughs or any of the stuff. He's like, every, 50 basis points, every 100 basis points, it counts, right? And it adds up. And I remember one time on the Facebook mobile. So it was like the mobile interfaces on like really bad phone connections. People who were using kind of like the T9, right? So they would kind of click through. We drastically increased the page creation, so kind of the top of the funnel for advertisers, by simply moving create page further up in the stack, so people had to click less times on the button to get to it. Like, not a groundbreaking idea, right? Some engineer who was like, hey, what if we just move it up faster or whatever? Well, nobody knew how much demand was there for people who wanted to create pages in, Indonesia and these other countries. And all of a sudden there was this big jump in revenue that kind of trickled down. And I remember Alex being so excited about it. And to me, it was like, man, I would have never thought, if you said, hey, what's the 2 things that we're going to do this quarter or whatever to, get growth, I would have never been like, well, we should go to the people who are using, the T9 mobile devices and move no way. It's just testing.
Yeah, I think growth, has a bad reputation now as a word, and sometimes maybe deservedly so. But I think good growth at the heart of it is looking at the data and experimenting. Absolutely. And then letting the data tell you where to go. So I think really well-run growth teams are fantastic at trying to figure out what is stopping a customer from doing something. For example, Facebook, and I think this was before our era, had this famous quote of 10 friends in 7 days, or 7 friends in 7 days. And the idea was, unless you have the certain number of friends in the first week or so, you were probably going to be lonely. You were probably not going to have a fantastic experience, because the end of it, Facebook is a social network. So they tried really hard in the first week to make sure that you had friends, that somebody was leaving a comment, that that somebody would see your photo or they would tag you. And I think that's where good growth thinking comes from, which is really looking at the numbers, trying to deeply understand what these people want, and then experimenting very quickly and learning from the data.
And they didn't make that up, right?
No.
It wasn't like somebody was just sitting there like, I think that you should have 10 friends in 7 days or whatever it was.
Yeah.
No, they looked at the data, and the data highly suggested that there was a massive increase in retention if you had this number of users in this many days on the service. So let's optimize for making people hit that metric so that then they will stay.
It is. And I think, so the interesting question, and kind of tying these 3 companies together is, if you compare, say, Facebook and, say, Snap, one thing I think is very interesting, and I have a pet theory, is I think Snap is a counterculture reaction to Facebook in many ways. And I have this sort of phrase I use, which is, I'm a big comic book nerd, and in the DC universe, there is a bizarro universe where everything is the exact opposite of what is like real in ours. So, for example, in DC universe, in Bizarro universe, Lex Luthor is a good guy. Bizarro Superman is a bad guy. The Earth is like, I think, a cube. Everything the exact opposite. And I think of Snap and Facebook at many levels as the exact opposites of one another. So, for example, and I'm going to tie this back into what we're talking about in culture. So, if you think about Snap, Facebook was always about, let's look at the data and let's look at where the data is going to lead us to answers. And they were really good at that. But I think one of the challenges with that approach, and I actually think they've done a fantastic job in recent handling this, is you can sometimes get locked into a local maxima of optimization.
Yeah. What are you optimizing for?
Yes. Yeah. So, for example, it's very easy to find yourself like optimizing the 100th different shade of green, where there might be a much better way of helping people create content somewhere else. And I think of Snap as the exact mirror image, where Snap really focused on creativity and helping people express themselves as their higher order bit, as the thing that they really wanted people to do, where Facebook is often led with data and impact. So one, I think these are kind of mirror images of each other. The other way I think they're kind of different was, at the time, Facebook was believed in, if you remember back in 2009 or 2008 when Facebook did the first F8, you had Chris Cox, chief product officer, show up on stage and talk about how Facebook should be the story of your life. Everything from birth all the way to your time in school, to your marriage, your first baby is going to be on the Facebook timeline. Snap said the exact opposite. It said the only thing which matters is this moment right now and who you're with right now. So nothing matters. So it was the exact opposite of what Facebook was going for. Facebook has always had a very neutral voice. If you remember, they famously ran a ad where they compared themselves to a bunch of chairs because they were like, we are a platform. We are here to help make the world more open and connected, where Snap has always believed in having an irreverent, goofy voice. So I think in many ways, they were the exact opposites of one another, which I think sometimes led Snap to find product answers, which a lot of other people would have struggled with. I'll give you an example. So, now face filters and filters are, everyone has it. Every single platform has it. But when Snap first built lenses, it was pretty unique. I think they had bought a company, but it was really the first company to kind of build at scale.
There was Luxury, I think was the name of the
yes.
company. Yeah.
I think they were based out of the Ukraine, if I remember.
Yeah.
And the question, so I left Facebook in, I believe like in 2015 or early 2016 to go work at Snap, where I headed up a bunch of revenue and ad products. And one of the reasons I wanted to go there was I wanted to understand, like, why does this company operate differently? Because when you open the app, it was very apparent they were doing something different. They operate differently than every other tech company in the Bay Area. And so one way to kind of think about this is, let's look at why do lenses work? And the easy pithy answer to say, well, they just help you express yourself, and it's fun, it's weird, it's goofy. But if you unpack that, there are many reasons why lenses work. Number one, and this I think a lot of people would assume this, it's only to your close friends and family, and it disappears after 24 hours. So the downside of me posting something embarrassing and it's staying forever, a future job prospect or a future spouse finding it, are negligible, right? Or when I run for president, getting embarrassed by that are low. So one, you're more open to just sharing yourself. That's one. Second, like we're doing this, interview right now. You follow me on Twitter. If I go on Twitter right now and post a selfie, you're like, that's fine. I'm posting a selfie. If I post 20 selfies on Twitter in the next few minutes, you're gonna be like, that's weird. Like, what's up with Sriram? Hey, Sriram, like, what's up?
Are you good, man?
Yeah, because it breaks the etiquette that we have on the internet. And but turns out a lot of people really want to post selfies. And what Snap did lenses is, have you ever been to a wedding where they have a photo booth and you have these big gloves and the goofy glasses? A lens is the digital version of that. So they give you a social license to post a selfie, because now you're like, this is just part of the product, and you have these raw materials to be creative and to be fun. So you're just not posting a selfie, you're like creating a character, you're telling a story, which brings me to number 3, which is, before lenses and stories, you could not tell a story linearly. So I write screenplays and novels on the side. I'm terrible at it, and so there's this theme called the Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, where every story kind of goes a particular way. Hero wakes up, he's happy, he gets a challenge, he sets off on a journey, he accomplishes his mission. And so it's kind of like, think of a lot of things. Every story follows his arc. With stories, in Snap, for the very first time, you could tell your own story. You could say, I woke up in the morning, I did this thing, oh my gosh, and then I went to bed. You could not do this on Feed, because in Feed, everything is reverse chronological. And finally, and most importantly, I think, stories didn't have numbers on the screen. So you had nothing which I think let people judge you or for you to judge yourself. So for example, even me, when I tweet and there's 0 reactions, I'm a big boy. I shouldn't need that affirmation, but I kind of feel bad.
Did I say something wrong?
Did I say something wrong? Like, do you not find me entertaining anymore? Right? Like, but with stories, nobody knows whether you have 0 fans or millions of them, which lets you to be more open. Now, Snap was able to combine, I think, all of these, and this is my own deconstruction of why these work, all of these together and build a fantastic product. Now, there is no way you can optimize your way to this. It requires some
thinking outside the box or kind of original thought.
Yeah, and I think you can't optimize your way to this. So I think Snap was very, very good at those things, where they were able to like intuitively form these products which really worked for a set of people, often like young people, in a way which I think was hard for the Silicon Valley to compete in. Now, of course, like now I think with Instagram and with TikTok, I think a lot of other folks have found their own ways of doing this. But at the time, it was like very different.
Yeah. You want to know an interesting fact that I found out earlier this week? The entrepreneur, I believe this is correct. This is what I read online, which now we have to question whether it's real or not because I read it online. But
everything is true online.
The entrepreneur who sold Luxury to Snap created a second company. It has something to do with like more like AI, but still around content creation, and just sold that to Snap as well for like $150 million.
Wow.
So 2 for 2, same entrepreneur, somewhere in Europe, I think, and both kind of creative products, but out of the box kind of creation tools.
So one thing that was very impressed me about that team is, I really had no exposure to Ukraine before that. Is how amazing a lot of engineers there are. I saw this at Facebook too. When I was at Facebook, you remember this? We bought this company called LiveRail. And
killed it.
Yeah.
Was it video ad management, basically?
Yeah, right? And they had some fantastic talent, and and they were based out of Cluj, if you remember, which honestly was not a city I really knew a lot about before. But I was just amazed at the talent they had, and I think only now are you seeing, with the focus on remote work, distributed teams, the rise in costs in San Francisco and New York, you're seeing much more tech companies leverage that. But one of the things I think Facebook and Snap were ahead of the curve around then is finding these pockets of talent in parts of the world which other people weren't looking for. Nobody was going out and trying to find a company like Cluj, right? And they were really good at spotting the talent.
Well, I think LiveRail, again, people will correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure LiveRail was the first profitable company that Facebook ever bought. And if I remember correctly, there was a hiccup in the acquisition because they were like, well, how do we value this thing? Because they were so used to buying products that had either no revenue or they were burning, venture money. And LiveRail came along and was like, no, we actually make money. We could go forever.
That is true. I think Facebook at the time, I think the big acquisition they had done was, I think they'd done Instagram. Yep. They were about to do WhatsApp.
Yeah.
They're about to do...
In 2014, my second day at Facebook, they announced WhatsApp for $18 billion. Wow. And I remember being like, whoa.
Yeah. Well,
this is big.
But that's another example of something I think I learned from Facebook, where Facebook is very good at not letting ego or not invented here syndrome get in the way. So a lot of other companies would have looked at something like WhatsApp and said, look, we have our own team, we have really smart people here, we should just go compete with them. In fact, you had been competing for many years, but Mark looked at that and was like, look, if we want to make the world more open and connected, that's the mission. WhatsApp at the time had, close to, it was on the path to getting to 1 billion users. It was clear they were going to get that. I don't remember the number, but they want to get there for sure. And if we believe in having impact, this is the most impactful thing to do. And if that's worth, say, 10% or so of my market cap, it seems like a fair trade-off. So there's so much in there, which I think a lot of other CEOs would not do. Being able to set aside your ego and saying, I know we competed hard with these guys, but I think I should look past it and bring them in. Focusing on impact. I think Mark has done that time and time again. He did that WhatsApp. He was doing that with the original Instagram acquisition, and also later, for example, building stories into Instagram, which is very controversial. I think Mark has been very good at reasoning from first principles and focusing on impact in a way I think a lot of other people find hard.
Yeah, my favorite part of the WhatsApp acquisition is Jan had applied for a job at Facebook. Obviously, gotten turned down, which people know, but a lot of people don't remember the part of the story where he took the acquisition papers and he actually signed them by going to
the place where he got his foot.
I think it was where he used to pick up the welfare checks with his family in Silicon Valley. I forget which town. And he literally, there's a photo of him. He's got the papers pressed up against the door, and he's signing it right on the front door of the building. And it's just, it's cool to see how meaningful stuff like that is to people. But I think also it's a testament to Mark and the executive team that, that's somebody who's pretty missionary driven, right? They're not just building a company to build a company to make money or anything like that. To get them to kind of see a vision with Facebook, et cetera, and to pull off an acquisition like that's very rare.
So two things there. One is Jan's story is super interesting. So there is a cliche about who a Silicon Valley founder is. You're below 30, you're wearing a hoodie, you went to Stanford, you look a certain type. Jan doesn't fit any of that. Nope. Jan's an immigrant, came from a very humble background. His family was on food stamps growing up. Had a stint at Yahoo before, was I think close to 40 or already over 40 when he started WhatsApp, which in the Silicon Valley scheme of things is
old.
Pretty old. And also he wasn't at Stanford or any of the Ivy League schools. He had gone to a community college. So in pretty much every respect, he was the opposite of what a Silicon Valley founder should be. And then in the way he built his company, WhatsApp famously hadn't raised money for many, many years until Sequoia came along. They just funded themselves using the $1 a year subscription fee they had for many, many years. Kept the team really small, really focused on performance. So I like to point at WhatsApp whenever, people say, kind of stereotype certain Silicon Valley behaviors. I like to point to WhatsApp in Jan as being the exact opposite of many of those behaviors. But second, to your point on Mark, it takes a certain executive team to set aside like their ego and be like, well, if you believe in the mission, this is the most impactful thing we can do.
And I think they negotiated that like on a Friday night at his house.
Yes.
Right? Like it wasn't like lawyers were involved. Right? I think the story that came out was just like, hey, they had dinner together and they said, we're going to do this. Right?
I think so. I think if I remember, Mark had built a relationship with Jan over time, and he had said something like, look, if you're ever thinking of doing something, you should give me a call and we should think about this. And one holiday season, they were like, well, we should go build the trigger, and how is this thing going to work? And I think history shows it worked out really well for like all parties involved.
Yeah, absolutely. What about Twitter? So Twitter's the one that people probably today, people listening to this podcast are probably most using, right? So some of them might use Facebook, some of them might use Snap, but Twitter for sure. But nobody really knows what's going on inside the company.
Well, first, as a stockholder, I'm really happy your audience is using Twitter. Please use more of it. I couldn't say these things when I was employed by the company, but I have no fiduciary duty.
Listen,
now.
You're free. You can tell us all the secrets.
I'm going to tell you everything, Pomp. So I left Snap, and I was very fortunate to be at Facebook and Snap, and I was trying to figure out what I want to do next. And started to do some investing, which I'm doing a lot more now. But I just started doing some investing, and honestly, I was just goofing around. Like this was the summer, by the way, when Bitcoin, which never sleeps, as you remind me so often on Twitter, had exploded. I think it gone to it did the curve before above $15,000, and I was out, I was writing a Solidity app. I was just kind of goofing around, and I knew Jack for a long time because I had been very active on Twitter. I have a little bit of a following, and Jack knew me. And Jack had just come back to Twitter, I think, the year before. And at the time, Twitter was not in a great spot because they had multiple rounds of layoffs. Jack had just come back, but it had not been a long time since he had come back. There were all these rumors because I think, Benioff and Salesforce had wanted to buy the company, but the deal had fallen apart, which we now know because Benioff's board had disagreed and vetoed it at the last moment. I think somebody reported that recently. And what I think also almost happened was Disney almost bought Twitter, and the deal fell apart, which we now know thanks to Bob Iger's excellent autobiography that he basically had a change of heart at the very last moment. So there were all these swirls, and the company had these, big, hard questions to deal with. So Jack and I had dinner a couple of times, and Jack said, look, you seem to have an understanding of the product, you use it a lot, and we have these really hard challenges. But more than that, we have a really important mission. So one thing I think connects all these founders, and definitely, Jack and Mark, is they're extremely mission driven. I want to know Jack somewhat well over the last few years. I will tell you that anything that Jack says in public is pretty much the exact same thing he says in private. In fact, he has very few secrets, and Twitter as a whole has very few secrets. And I always tell people, you just have to read between the lines of what he's saying. So Jack, in these dinners, he would convince that how much he believes in the public conversation, and what he means by the public conversation, what he believes in it, and why it's important for Twitter to serve the public conversation. And he really convinced me, he was like, look, the elections had just happened, so the country was going through this really interesting, polarizing time, obviously, and Twitter was just playing a big part in world culture. I think the Black Lives Matter had just happened the year before, and he's like, this company is going to be really important, and we are going through such a rough time. You can come and help us, basically. And I was convinced, and for a while I was a little bit queasy because I had done 2 of these social media companies before. I tell people, am I like a nerdy Thanos collecting the infinity gauntlet of social media companies, right? But ultimately it came down to Jack, and he really won me over with his sincerity, his focus on the mission. And I was like, I said, okay, I'm in. So I said yes, I think, like almost like 3 years ago now. And the next was like, what do I do? So I had spent enough time doing tours of duty and advertising, and Twitter had a fantastic team who was already working in ads, and they didn't need any help there. And the question was, well, we need help with consumer product. So, Jack said, look, we need help, helping people stay informed using Twitter. So everything from user growth to onboarding to the home timeline, or how it ranks, how it looks, all of it, search, explore moments, trends. We need somebody to kind of come in, take over the teams and help shape the products. And I said, well, this is obviously such an interesting opportunity because it was so meaningful. I was like, I'm in. So that was Twitter, and it's been a fantastic few years there because I like to joke that Twitter is the most public of public companies, because one, you're obviously a public company in the in the Wall Street sense of the word. You have an earnings report, you have investors, and you're on that cycle. But you're also a public company in the sense you're serving this public conversation, and you have some of the most interesting, influential communities and people using Twitter every single day. Like crypto Twitter is a perfect example, because I think without Twitter, the crypto community would not be what it is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And everything from Vitalik to Nawal to so many interesting people. You obviously on Twitter every single day. So you're such a public company, and it's so public in the sense like it's the only company where the most important people in the world tell you how much you suck using your own product too.
Yeah.
So you definitely get that. So it was an intense few years.
I always laugh when I see some big account tweet at Jack, right? They always at him, and they say, I wish there was a damn edit button, right? And it's always like, Ice-T or, like some random account who they don't think of it as like a technology product that they use every day, and then they make some mistake. And
yeah, I always want Jack to go be like, well, we never thought of that before. Thank you. It's interesting. So Jack actually covered this in a recent interview. So I think the history behind this is that Twitter was designed to be text messaging, and when you send somebody an iMessage text, you don't think of editing it. And that's how they wanted to be the short, easy to send messaging. And that's kind of the heart and soul of Twitter. It still is the heart and soul of Twitter in many ways. So edit was not a functionality that was needed. So one was there was this historical component. Second, there was this concern about, for example, let's say I say something and you retweet it, you point out something I said was wrong, or you correct me, then I change what I said. It could change the meaning of the conversation that you've been having. So it's kind of these meaningful questions about, how do we sort of preserve these conversations and maybe stop bad actors. I think that's the second one. And the third one, was how important it is in terms of how many people really need it versus they can just fix a typo later. So I always laugh because I think whenever Jack tweets, I see like 1 million people be like, yes, Jack, but like ship edit. And I always laugh, but Jack's very patient.
What is it like having a CEO? Because Mark and Evan both were 100% focused on the businesses, meaning that they were there every single day, all day long, etc. Jack is fascinating to me because he's got Twitter and Square, both that are successful businesses that you could look at it and any entrepreneur would hang their hat on just one of them, right? And say, look what I built. He seems to now with Cash App and Bitcoin and a lot of stuff, like he has this appetite for more, right? And so kind of what was it like working with somebody who was spending a lot of time and was obviously paying attention to Twitter and really cared about that public conversation, but also didn't have just one single focus, right? He had these other interests as well and was spending time there.
So Jack, Evan, and Zuck are so different. Yeah. We spoke about Mark being focused on impact and speed, Evan being focused on creativity. Jack is very different. I think he is obsessed with thinking from first principles and simplicity. I like to joke with people that Twitter has no secrets. You just have to listen to Jack on any of his podcasts. You listen to him on Rogan, you listen to any of his things. He's basically laying out, what he thinks for what Twitter should do, what Square should do. It's all there. And one thing I've really come to appreciate about Jack is his rigorous focus on being focused on principles, having very simple principles, and then building your life, your company, every single decision from those principles. That's one. Second is obsession with simplicity. So he's obsessed with keeping things as simple as possible. Is it 140 or 280 characters to a tweet to how Square works? So if I had to take away like the top two things I've learned from Jack, I think those would be right at the top. outside of that, I think one of Jack's, I always tell people, and Jack's, is so different. He looks different. I like to.
He walks to work. He doesn't own a laptop, I think, right?
Yeah, he's focused on his iPad.
Yeah.
I like to make fun of him for his fashion choices. And one of the things I think then you look at it and you're like, well, here's a person who has founded not one but two $20+ billion publicly traded companies, and also in two completely different domains. So if you knew nothing about, say, Jack or how he looks or what he says, you're like, how does somebody do that? I'm guessing the number of people who fit that pattern are probably really small. I think Elon is up there, a few others, but not a lot of people do that. I think one of the things that Jack does really well is he finds great people, and he really empowers them. So, for example, at Square, he had Sarah for many years. He had Gokul Rajaram for many years. At Twitter, one of the things I think he's been very good at is building what he thinks was an enduring team. So, and that he is not needed in every single decision. So you have fantastic people. You have K1 running product. You have, Ned Siegel, who's, probably my favorite CFO among any CFOs. And Jack was like, look, I'm going to build this fantastic team. I'm going to really trust them so that I am not a bottleneck in any single decision. Now, of course, when something needs a CEO to weigh in, Jack's going to weigh in, but he really trusts his team. And for me, that was so liberating because in the first place, I was like, whoa, I'm kind of running this, meaningful part of Twitter in this very, which is something which, by the way, everyone in tech has an opinion on. And definitely everyone in crypto has an opinion on. But also, after a few months, I was like, it's kind of cool because, Jack will say, you are in charge, you should feel free to go do what you think is right. And that's very liberating, I think, for a lot of people. You don't get a lot of that freedom. And I think that's kind of the key to how he's able to run all these companies, both Square and Twitter, but also be looking further out, right? He's looking further out at, Bitcoin, and both for Square and for Twitter, and also like different countries. So I think the lesson from Jack is principles, simplicity, and get great people, and you go trust them.
Yeah. You mentioned 140 characters to 280. Yeah. I was in the anti character camp, and not for anything other than like, hey, I like Twitter and like don't screw it up, right? Just like for no other reason than just like it works pretty good and like why change it if not. I gotta say though, in hindsight, probably one of the best moves that could have happened.
And it was
exponentially better experience.
There's a fantastic story there. So I remember. So I can take no credit for that because that team was already working on it way before I showed up, and they were fantastic, smart set of people. When I was having dinners with Jack about joining Twitter, he said, "Look, I'm going to share something with you. We're going to double the character limit." I was like, whoa, because 140 characters is the heart and soul of Twitter, and it seems like a big deal. And I remember telling him, Jack, well, regardless of what happens, right, I think it's a fantastic move. Number one, if it doesn't work, you can always revert it back, right? But number two, and I'm going to tell you why they did it, but number two, I think it was a big symbolic move that nothing is sacred. That you and Jack, as a new kind of coming back as CEO, was like, nothing is sacred. We should look at any sacred cow, examine everything from first principles. So,
and I think that's why I was against it, was because in my mind it was sacred, right? Like which is a great kind of contrast to even better for them to look at it and change it.
So
right?
So the question was like, why change it, right? And so what Twitter was finding was, this all started with Japan. So something which is actually not a lot of people know is Twitter is huge in Japan. In fact, for reasons which I think kind of exactly the opposite of why Facebook has not been really huge, because in Japan, Twitter has all these amazing communities where be it manga or be it following pop culture, Twitter's kind of found this great product market fit for Japan for many years. And the Japanese language, and I'm not an expert, so I could be getting the details wrong, is much more dense from an information content than the English language. So with 140 characters in Japanese, you are able to communicate a lot more than you're able to do with 140 characters in English, just because the density of the characters involved. And there was this, I think this engineer or data scientist who saw that, and he was like, this is interesting. So what if we brought that exact same behavior onto English Twitter? So they did the math. They were like, what is the length of, the Japanese actual length? Because it's not 140 characters, you're able to transmit more information. what is the actual length that's in English? It came to 279, which is
Really?
I remember this very well. They were like, 279 characters in English kind of matches 140 characters in Japanese, and we were like, and so that was one data point. The other data point was Twitter graphed the amount of tweets with characters, and you saw this curve where you saw a pretty normal distribution, but there was this huge spike at 139 and 140. Basically, people are right at the limit and they were cut off. Where in Japan, you saw a much smoother curve, right? And they were like, maybe people want to say more, but they're stuck. No, there's this question of like, but that's the magic of Twitter. You don't want people to kind of drone on and on. You have like a blog.
It's not Medium, right?
It's not Medium. If you want to announce your job change, go do it on Medium. But in Twitter, it's meant for conciseness. But what if you could have both, right? And we almost had Japan as an evidence point of you could have short, succinct, the creativity, the magic, the sort of the creative choices you have to make to be funny or engaging on Twitter, but also get people to say more. And so, 279 characters just seems like a bizarre number to go pick, and the team decided, let's make it 280. They launched that, and this was, I would say, a very scary launch, because most tech companies, when they launch something, you can A/B test it in a small audience, you can test it out, but you can't test how a large community is going to react to such a change. So Twitter was like, okay, we're going to really go in for this, and this is, I think, a lot of credit goes to Jack, because Jack had just come back as CEO. He had been there for a year, and he was like, you know what, I believe in this. I'm going to go for it, and we're going to question the most sacred of sacred cows. And if you remember this, like, that was not a popular opinion, right?
It was not.
It's interesting. When you work at Twitter, you have to very quickly grow thick skin, because everyone using the product is going to tell you how wrong you are. And so, but we launched it, and the funny part is, and I think there's a great post about they did a year after launch. The graph matched exactly what Twitter predicted was going to be. It turns out that one was it didn't change the magic. People are using Twitter more, engaging more, but that sort of spike where people are stopping at 140 characters smoothed out, and people are able to communicate more. So it was kind of this, I really like that, because one, it's such a bold decision for Jack to make, but also a very data-driven one. You had this balance. So I love this story, but I will tell you, for a couple of weeks, it was not fun.
All right, the $1 million question for Twitter before we move on.
Oh gosh.
Everyone wants to know how to get verified, and for quite a while, you were the victim of whenever that question was asked of as an executive. You were the guy doing verifications. What's going on there?
So first off, that part is not true. I never worked on verifications. Adam Bain, who used to be COO of Twitter, when he left, played this joke where in his bio he pointed people to me and he said, Sriram's now chief verification officer and they should come to me. And I swear, like, every single day I got and by the way, I'm sure even just mentioning this is going to get me more emails now. I would get like dozens of emails from all sorts of like nice people, well-intentioned people, to some really bizarre ones. I got all sorts of emails and tweets. I did not work on verification, and so I will. You know what? I'm gonna, for the first time, I'm gonna copy an answer Jack gave. Jack was asked this last week, and he said, K1 Bevpur is the current head of product at Twitter. He said, just go tweet him. He's at KAYVZ. He's got you. Just tweet at him and he's going to get you verified. So he's not. He's going to hate me for this.
At KAYZ. VZ.
Yeah.
Okay.
Get that right. So, and you want to make sure that he sees you to verify.
Because if he doesn't see you, then he can't verify you.
Yeah. He's going to verify every single person who sees and tweets at him. He's going to verify. And if he doesn't see you at first, just tweet him a few more times just to make sure.
Make sure.
Yeah. Maybe I can give your audience his phone number too.
This is my favorite joke in all of Silicon Valley. Of all the inside jokes I'm aware of, this is my favorite one, because everyone wants to know how they get verified on Twitter.
Okay, so there are two funny stories. One is I used to get I got a lot of interesting people reach out to me,
like serious people, really, as well people. As like crazy
for example,
people.
Once I get a cold email, and I'm just going to sound name droppy, but like I got like Post Malone like send me a cold email about verification. I was like, I was not sure it was him, you know, but then he followed me on Twitter too, so that was very interesting. But I also got some like really weirdos.
How does Post Malone start an email? Is he like, yo dog, or is it more of like a hello, I would like a verification?
He had a friend, I think, who needed verifying.
Oh, okay.
And
so not him.
Not him. He was verified. He has like a huge following. He basically had like, I have a friend who needs help. It's Post. And I was
Post.
Yeah, and I was like, Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's fake. Until I saw his account had just followed me.
Yeah.
And I then asked somebody else who knew them, and they were like, it's actually legit. I was like, okay. Then I was able to kind of
Get him in
point
the right-
him to some people.
That means that Sriram knows who does the verification.
The other part of it, I think sometimes you get some scary people. Like, I once got what I'll just kind of roughly say as somebody high in the armed forces of a country which is not friendly to the United States sent me an email saying their boss, who was a very senior figure, had just created a Twitter account and they wanted to get verified. And when I didn't reply, they kind of sent me more and more aggressive emails, and I had to send it to Twitter security because I was like, I don't know, like this is
real.
This person has some real resources, so I don't want to piss them off. They were capable of some really bad things. You get these like really fun, interesting things. The challenge with verification, by the way, and I think this is why like Blue Sky and all these efforts are really interesting, is verification is many things in once.
Mm-hmm.
So one is, I think it is, and this is not, I'm not talking about Twitter here. I think it's true for any platform like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. When you verify someone, you give them the blue check or the green check, it means one, you are who you say you are. So you are actually
authenticity. Yep.
Authenticity. Second, it's also some form of social capital.
Mm-hmm.
So where it means that you're somehow meaningful.
Yeah,
or
you're quote unquote important.
You're quote unquote important. And these things get conflated. And by the way, I think I have this theory which like social capital and social currency is one of the best ways to both understand social media and to kind of how to compete with them. But in this example, so you can often have somebody who we think of as a really bad person, who's committed a crime or runs an organization which like any reason people think this is terrible, but they have a lot of people impersonating them on, say, Instagram or TikTok or Twitter, and they need to verify them because they are actually who they say they are. And these things get very conflated. You also have all these interesting questions. Like, for example, let's say somebody's running for office, and they get verified because you want to make sure you know who the actual candidates are. But then after a while, they maybe lose and they go back to being a normal citizen. Do you unverify them or do you keep them in? So there are all these interesting questions. So I have a lot of sympathy for, there are some really smart folks working on it in all of these platforms. It's a very, very hard problem. Which is why, by the way, so I really like Blue Sky because I think it's often an alternative approach.
Okay, explain.
So for context, Blue Sky is this new effort from Jack and Twitter to basically build a decentralized version of Twitter. And the mental picture I like to paint people is, think of Gmail today. You open up Gmail, you open up your browser, you see a list of your emails. Some algorithm has sorted the spam away, stuck it in a trash spam folder. Some algorithm has tried to figure out like what is social, what is promotion, sort those in their inboxes. There is a fantastic UI experience. And at the bottom of it, there is some SMTP happening and some IMAP happening, maybe when these mail servers talk to each other, the MX protocol, but you don't really know it because you're so abstract away. And my mental model for this is, so Jack basically announced on Twitter a few weeks ago that he and Twitter are going to sponsor something called Blue Sky, which is an effort to build an open source, decentralized social network protocol from the ground up, which Twitter is then going to support. It's very early stages. I think right now they're basically looking for somebody to come in and run it. I think it's very likely it's going to have strong ties to crypto for all the obvious reasons. And my analogy was in this Gmail example. Think, you now have Gmail, but you never had SMTP. You never had alternative clients, right? And that's what social media is today. When you have Facebook, you have a stack. You have the UI of like, how does these things look? How do I post things? You have this incredibly complicated ranking algorithm machinery, which you are familiar with, like one of the most sophisticated piece of software ever built by mankind. You have all sorts of policies. You have policies on moderation, what kind of content is allowed to stay up or not allowed to stay up. You have policies on verification. And so you basically get this in a box. There's no way you can tell Facebook, hey, I want all of this, but I want to plug in my own ranking algorithm. You can do this on email. Like, you can write a client right now and do your own email hosting and be like, I'm going to pick my own spam email. You don't need Gmail. You can't do that on Facebook. You can't do that on Twitter. And one of the things that's really exciting for me is what if we could now, using my analogy, split out SMTP and email, and then a lot of people can innovate on top of it. For example, right? You don't like how Twitter is verifying people, build your own verification policy. The crypto community could say, we're only going to verify people with some proof of stake or proof of work, or we could have Pomp Twitter, where only people who Pomp likes will get verified and no one else. So you got to come kiss the ring. So you could imagine sort of this, and you can imagine for algorithms. So if you don't like how any social media platform is prioritizing who gets reach, what gets prioritized, you want to pick something else. Like, for example, you say, I don't want algorithms which only prioritize things which get liked or retweeted. I want an algorithm which prioritizes things which has the most information, things which have the most helpful content. And you have a way to figure this out. You could build that algorithm and you can plug that in. So I think it can really open up a wave of innovation and just people building on top of social media in a way which hasn't happened before. Now, there's a long way to go, right? There are all these unexplored questions around how will this work? How will other platforms support it? How will cryptocurrency plug in? It's super early days, but I'm really excited for this.
Yeah, and to me, we've seen this in crypto where people have to they want to get to a decentralized end state, and so you can just start out trying to be decentralized, or you can start out centralized and decentralize over time. I don't know if there's an agreement yet on every single way to do this. What's the best one? We know with Bitcoin, obviously, just decentralized from day one, but one person was the first, right? And then it kind of decentralized very quickly. And I think Twitter exploring this, the thing that I appreciate about Jack, he just announced with Square, they released the Lightning Network Development Kit, with Blue Sky. It's tools, right? It's, look, I don't want to be the guy in the position of making all the decisions. I actually think that there's many different answers for many different people. Here's a bunch of tools, do what you want to do, right? And which I think is pretty powerful.
And I think you can sort of construct this from Jack's first principles in some way. So Jack believes a couple of things, right? He believes that on the internet, everything's going to live forever in a blockchain. And two, that relevance algorithms are what really matters. And sometimes I don't think people often pay deep attention to what he says when he says, but I think you can sort of construct everything he has done from just those two sentences. So, for example, if everything's going to live forever on the internet, it doesn't really matter as much what gets taken down or what stays up. What really matters is what gets reach and what gets amplification. So, for example, if we do this podcast and no one listens to it, does it really matter if YouTube puts it up, takes it down, or Spotify puts it up or takes it down? It doesn't matter. But what really matters is if Spotify features it, or Apple is going to feature it somehow, or their ranking algorithm prioritizing, that really matters more. So Jack really believes in this. And I think, one of the things he's talked about is someday he wants Twitter to just be a set of relevance algorithms working on this corpus of content. So then, for example, if you disagree with, some moderation policy or who's getting verified, it's all there. You can build your own implementation, and Twitter could maybe have an alternative implementation of that, but you're free to go do your own thing. So that's one of the things I really like about Jack, where every one of his decisions, or which I think the company did, you can sort of build on top of his principles and really kind of layer them on, and they're all intellectually consistent, which I think is really liberating, because when you're a company, it gives you a framework of what is important, how are you supposed to work, how do you make prioritizations, which is often really hard. So that's kind of one of my key lessons from Jack.
Yeah. You write a lot.
Yes, sadly.
No, but it's very good. Where can people read the writing first?
Well, thank you. So I think there are two places where I'm very active. One is on Twitter itself. I'm at SriramK, SRIRAMK at Twitter. And the other is on my own site, where I have a blog and a newsletter at sriramk.com, where I try and kind of collect some of the things I've been writing every once in a while.
So you've written on a variety of things, everything from
I have an opinion on everything.
But it's great because everything from super operational things, like how are you successful as an executive when you join a company in the first 30 days, right? That's really actionable, to this idea that I want to explore a little bit of organizations being systems, right? And kind of Apollo and all this stuff. So maybe talk a little bit about how you think about the organizations as systems, and where does that really come from?
So by the way, my motivation for writing is very simple. It's very selfish. I think I really think writing online is a superpower. I highly encourage everyone to do it because it's the best way to put up a portfolio of who you are and how you think to the world.
Yep.
And it has opened so many doors for me. I've met so many great people, both for work and not work. I highly recommend everyone doing it. For example, you had your previous guest, David Peddle, on here.
Yeah.
I met him through his writing. I loved what he was writing, and I met him, and he's one of the smartest people I've met purely from his writing alone. So I think it's a real superpower. And I would say, two ulterior motives for writing. One was I love meeting interesting people. When you write something, and it's hopefully good, interesting people seek you out. Because you find they're often trying to find great things also. So it's a good way to be like, here's a bat signal. When you write on a topic, you often get the best people in the world reaching out to you. So I talk to an example. When I started writing on like companies and collecting some of the emails from these companies, I got so many interesting people just email me and talk to me about it. So it's a great, it's kind of like having a homing beacon where you get really smart people to come to you instead of you having to go to them. So that's one. And the second thing, honestly, it's for myself because, a lot of these things I'm writing on something where I had no idea what I was doing, and kind of through painful trial and error, I learned something over a period of time, and kind of helped me work through my thoughts. And then after some time, I can kind of go back and refer to it. So for example, I have this post which is referred to on the first 30 days in executive. So, when I kind of took on sort of these more and more meaningful roles, I really struggled with like, how do I do this job? And a lot of people I think struggle with impostor syndrome, and I was one of them. I was like, I'm too young, I haven't done this before. Why should I be running? Why should I be telling like a few hundred people what to do? And I built a playbook over time, asking a lot of people. So, for example, I think a lot of people hit this thing where they get a new job. Either you join a new company in a senior role, or you get a promotion where you're now an executive running a really large organization, or maybe you just taken on a different role and you were, say, a general counsel and you're now like a COO or a CFO moving to CEO. I think all of these are new jobs, and it's really hard to figure out what you should do because the people don't know you, they don't trust you. It's a new job, so you don't know what you're doing. You don't have all the answers at your fingertips yet, but people already look to you for the answers. And by the way, the clock is running because unless you show impact and results, they're going to be like, yeah, somebody's just being paid a lot of money, but like, why is he or she even here? So, and I struggled a lot myself. So I built this playbook where, and by the way, Andrew Bosworth, Boz at Facebook is, one of the folks who really helped me with this in the first 30 days, you follow this. Number one is you go meet everyone, right? You literally meet you do nothing else but just meeting people all day. You do no active decisions. You take part in like really no active work. You just meet everyone, every peer, every mid-level manager, every skip level report, everyone you can think of. And every meeting you do the same thing. One, you figure out what they're working on, but you ask them two questions right at the very end. You ask them, what are the sort of the few things that you want to see improved in this org, and who are other two smart people I should go talk to? And very quickly, within 2-3 weeks, you're going to build a map. You're going to build a map of these are repeating themes that show up. Two is you're going to figure out like who are all the smart people who act as information source and you should keep an eye on. So it's going to kind of act as this like huge accelerated education path in a very short period of time. So that's step A. I think step B is to just communicate all the time. So when you're new, I have this phrase called like you have to be elected, not selected. When you get a new job, I think execs who fail think that they now have power, but you don't. Right? You have hundreds of people, thousands of people, who now have to believe that they are in the best job possible for them, that you are someone worth listening to. And you might be, but you haven't proven it to them yet. They don't know you. You may have just seen a press release on you, or they might have seen you as a different organization, but not running this. So what do you do? And I think you have to communicate. You have to talk about who you are, what you're doing all the time. So they hear from you, they get to know you. And this can be as simple as like an email a week with like, here are my top priorities in terms of who am I meeting, right? So they get to know who you are as a person a little bit more, because as an executive, you often like have so many people and they don't get face time, and they're going to make snap judgments of you based on seeing in a hallway or some offhand comment. So the more you can talk to them and hear from you directly, I think it's super powerful when they're getting to know you. That's second. Third, I think, is you have a very limited time window to make changes. So I would say you have about a month. And I think any team, when you come in, you're going to find out that there are certain things that are not working. Either organizational structures or often just people. And it's not their fault. It could be that they were in the wrong role or it's some reason it's not working out. Now, the team is going to look to you to make those changes very quickly because I've seen this in every organization, there's always some like well-known thing which is going wrong. And the team's going to almost judge you based on...
test.
It's a test of like, can you actually fix it for us quickly? Because the other person, the predecessor, he or she could not. So you have a limited window to do the obvious thing. And I think, and finally, and I think this is super important, they have to see you roll up your sleeves and be in action. So Rahm Emanuel, he used to be mayor of Chicago and then, worked with the Obama administration, had a great quote, which is never waste a good crisis. And I believe that in the first 2 months, if there is some way for you to dig into the details and not something super abstract like, here's a strategy for the next 5 years. Not that that's not important, but that's often more abstract, it's going to take more time. Something as simple as, hey, you know what, this, customer, we're going to lose this customer, right? Or this product launch is not going well. And for you to figure out how to add value, right? And roll up your sleeves. And this is very important because adding value is very different. Like sometimes you swooping in can be the worst thing because you don't know anything, they don't know you. But for you to be useful and for them to see you in action and for them to go, hey, this person's actually not so bad. They're up rolling their sleeves and they're doing something. So I was very lucky at Twitter. Like, my first, a couple of months, we had this big product launch that we had to go through. Most people have already built it, but you're kind of in the big end stages of it. So I got a chance to be like, okay, this is great because now I get to meet everyone. They get to see me in action. I get to learn a lot and they get kind of an accelerated version of knowing what it is to work with me. And I think that goes a long way in helping you build credibility. So now I kind of built this playbook over a period of time, mostly through trial and error, and I wrote this just as a reference to myself. And you'd be amazed how often like people like come to me, they're like, oh, I discovered I love this and this is what I've learned and now I learned something from them. So that's one. Now, in organization systems, one of the things, I being in Facebook, Snap, and Twitter is you realize there are many ways to do the same thing, build the same product. In fact, I joke that I've been in the exact same decision in 3 different companies. And you get to really see how different teams and organizations structure things very differently. So just for my own education, I started really diving into this, what makes a good organization? And you have so much literature on this, right? Like, I'm sure there are like a zillion Harvard Business School case studies you can go to, a billion business books. But for me, I think I looked at a couple of places, right? I looked at what are some of the quickest, most impactful projects that have ever been done, and it turns out like, sending someone to the moon ranks, right at the top, and also, where can I really understand, and not just by reading books, how the insides of great organizations work, right? And that's when I really started collecting my memos because I found out like that's actually a great way is when you kind of look at how they communicate on the inside, you understand how they work. And then you can build a sort of a system or a playbook. So for example, when you look at like Mueller and what they did with Apollo, you learn there's some very basic things they got very right. For example, things which sound very obvious, but small teams. Everyone knows what the goal is. Everyone knows what the steps to the goal are. There is super open communication, which was not a given. Super crisp sort of like intermediate steps and metrics that they need to go hit. Because you can just send somebody to the moon. You need to kind of launch something into space and have it come back quickly. And you had all these other things you need to go verify. And this sounds very brain dead, but it actually turns out to be really hard. And most people don't even get it right. And I just started collecting these examples because for me, one of the things I was trying to figure out at Twitter is how do I make, my, part of Twitter better functioning, well-run, delivering fantastic product experiences. And I was like, where do I go learn this? So I was just looking, let's look at all the classics. Let's look at some of the best products that ever been built. So that's kind of what started my curiosity.
Where did that curiosity converge with memos, right? So we were talking before that I think you and I both like these memos, which are usually a little bit longer kind of writings from well-known figures. I've taken more of a liking to what I call financial memos. Yep. So these are Wall Street investors who write quarterly or annually. Warren Buffett annual letter is probably the most famous of that type. You have spent more time reading and really liking what I'll call like the operator memos, right? So this is Mark Zuckerberg, this is Katzenberg, all these folks who are writing. Where did that fascination or curiosity come from?
Honestly, out of purely selfish motivation where, when I, for example, joined Twitter, I was like, I don't know how to do this job. I never done an organization of this size before, this complexity before in such a public way. And and how do you even communicate, right? Like, how do you write a fantastic strategy doc? But the word memo is overloaded with just an email or just a doc. How do you get a great strategy doc? How do you send an email to the team which motivates them when times are hard? And I just started collecting examples. One of the things you quickly realize, and I think you've been on the inside of these companies, is the inside of these large tech companies are chaotic, very personality driven. Whenever some press pieces like, oh, this company has this conspiracy theory, I'm like, are you kidding? We can't even get like 5 people to meet together in the same room at the same time. And often I think it's really hard to form a accurate impression of what is happening on the inside from just reading press releases or even reading books after the fact. You just don't get the insight. But there is one way to figure out what is actually happening inside. To go read the actual words these people have written. The executives, the CEOs, the founders, the presidents. And these are often really hard to find. One, because they're on the inside, they're often protected. They're not often made public. So over the years, whenever one of these would pop up, I just kind of stuck them in a little Dropbox folder. So for example, and they would often pop in a few ways, right? One, some of these are historical. I have a lot of historical ones. I have one from like an ex-White House chief of staff. I have one from like, DuPont about like that time. I have some of these historical ones that have now made their way into the public domain. A lot of them are through leaks. So, for example, when the Sony leak happened, I think the press really looked at the salacious details. I looked at like, how does Sony run as a company? What are all the great smart executives writing, and how do they motivate their team? How are they writing an all hands memo? How are they delivering bad news? I kind of looked at that just to learn from. That's two. Third, it comes from press leaks. For example, Facebook recently had a bunch of emails, which by the way, I'm actually, one of my emails is in them, released by the UK government, and again, the press I think is going to focus on certain
Sriram said what?
Yeah, I actually turns out that I actually came out looking pretty good. So I did have a moment of nervousness. I was like, did I say something really embarrassing? So I came out looking pretty good. But but I looked at like, okay, what are all these folks who I really respected? What are they doing? So and then over the years I just kind of collected them, and about 4 or 5 months ago, I put it up on my site. It's at sriramk.com/memos, and it was amazing. So one is, I think the memos it's a great teaching tool to help you understand how different leaders handle situations. So a couple of my favorite ones. One is, let's use one from Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg is one of the most strategic thinkers you'll ever meet. But
hands down,
yeah. And you, whenever you're in a meeting with him, you're just blown away by the sheer force of its intellect. And I think you and I have been these things, so you know how real that sentence is. But
and to me, the intellect isn't like, oh, he's a big thinker. I remember there was a meeting once, and I won't go into all the details, but basically there was a new product that was being presented to him that hadn't yet been rolled out, and he was having to think very strategically about the resources that were being used. Where does this fit inside of our plans, the impact it could have, a whole bunch of like really big things. And literally in the middle of the presentation, he drilled in. It was like that what's wrong with that? Right. And it was like pixel level attention to detail, and it was just like, holy shit, like 10,000 foot view down to feet on the ground, back to 10,000 view, all in seconds. And it was just incredible. Yeah,
and it's kind of humbling because you're looking at be like, I have the same data that he has. I'm looking at the same thing. In fact, you're sometimes closer to it, but he's able to see a pattern, or he's able to kind of play out a set of like chess moves into the future, how something would play out, and look further ahead. And it is amazing. And it's really hard to talk about this in public because you're like, well, you're just saying that because like Mark Zuckerberg, you work for Mark or something. Yeah. But it is really true. And also it's never exposed to the public because all of it is internal to Facebook, which is why every Facebook employee often talks about this, but you don't really see it in the press. Except a bunch of his emails over time have kind of shown up in the public domain because of leaks, or because of the
FOIA requests, or
because of like these various sort of legal processes. So I found a couple of these memos, which I was like, great. Now I have an example which I can showcase to the world, which won't get me like sued by Facebook legal of like how Mark writes. So one of my favorite ones is on the site, which is Mark about a couple of years ago. He makes a case for why Facebook should buy Unity, right? And it is like it's like almost like a 7 to 8 page memo. Now, you should think about you can think about like a lot of companies where this conversation would have played out. Of course, the deal never happened, but a lot of conversations would have been like about the math, the numbers, the valuations, and other teams would have been doing it for Mark as CEO of like a $400 billion company. But Mark writes a memo himself, and he lays out a strategic rationale about how he sees Facebook changing, how he sees the face world changing and adopting gaming more. And he says, look, we are a communication platform. We're all about making the world open and connected, but essentially we always run on someone else's platform. We run on Apple, we run on Google. But for long term, for us to be not at sort of at the whim and fancy of someone else, we need to own our own platform. And he kind of makes this case for VR and AR and Unity as a part of it. And then he says, well, if we do Unity, what's it going to mean? How do we get different companies to work with us? Will they stop working with us? And there's just there are so many things going on in here. One is at a 10,000 foot level, he's thinking about how the world is going to change and how technology is going to change. Second, he's thinking about Facebook's strategic position in that world and how, what it needs to do to compete, to stay ahead of things. Third, he's thinking about if this happens, what game theorying out various situations. And he's writing this really elaborate memo to his execs, which, by the way, he doesn't need to. He can just basically say the word and they can do it. But and it's just a fantastic way of writing. Yeah. And I look at it whenever I need to write something really strategic of how to break down an argument and be really thoughtful. So that's one example. To look at a very different kind of example, like Jeffrey Katzenberg, writes this famous memo, and Katzenberg, of course, now works on Quibi, but, he's obviously a Hollywood legend for his time at Disney and DreamWorks. And he writes this great memo in the early 90s about how the current Hollywood studio model is broken. And it's such an interesting look at sort of an insider opining on movie studios, which you never see because you're talking to a peer. So you understand the space, you understand the vocabulary space, and you such fantastic strategic thinking in action. But my favorite memo, and I think this is one which not a lot of people notice because it's not like a well-known name, is Dave Goldberg, right? And so Dave Goldberg, who I think we all knew very well, was Cheryl's husband. He sadly passed away a few years ago. He was CEO of SurveyMonkey. And there's an email between him to Michael Linton, who was running Sony here in the US at the time, where I think Michael had asked him, help me understand the music business. And this is an email sent from one person to another person. Nobody else is going to see this ever. And I'm pretty sure if I hadn't put up on the site, it never gotten shown. But it's
by the way, it's the CEO of Sony asking Dave Goldberg about the music industry.
Right.
Pretty crazy.
It's pretty crazy. And, and he basically breaks down, how does this industry work? Who makes money? How should Sony position itself strategically? It's one of the best written emails I've seen, and it blew my mind because, as to my knowledge, before the Sony emails got hacked, only one other human being had ever seen that email. So I think, what this helps me with all these emails is in the finance world, when you're an investor writing a letter, you have a bunch of objectives. You are here to, talk your portfolio.
Yeah, you're talking publicly for sure.
Right. And you're basically saying, look, I'm a great person to be a custodian of your money in some shape or form. But when you're an operator, you have multiple agendas, right? You are trying to make a case to management. You're trying to make a case often to people who work for you, but you still need to make a case to them. You're trying to rally the troops. You're trying to bring morale up. You are trying to help simplify a really complicated topic with multiple different incentives. There are so many different things going on. And for me, the memos kind of act as like kind of this educational aid where I'm like, okay, this is how the greats have really done it. And, if you have like a White House chief of staff writing a memo to his successor, like whatever problem you're solving is like much less important than what they were dealing with. So, and how did they deal with that? So it's a fantastic education aid. And so I put this up a few months ago on the site. What has blown me away since then, and this why writing online is a superpower, is every day I get an email about it, and you get some of the most thoughtful, beautiful emails, and I get people sending me new memos. So I get new memos all the time, and sometimes I'll be like, whoa, you can't send me that because your company's like legal department is going to either sue me or sue you. But sometimes you get these fantastic people who just send me their own memos or memos they know of, and it is beautiful. So I've gotten to add so many fantastic memos, and it just kind of, it's this machine which keeps going. So it's been one of my favorite things to do.
when you put the light up, right, and people are attracted to it. It's like it really is a magnet.
It
right?
is, and one of my goals is to someday maybe like interview the people in the memos and think about like, okay, what is going on when you're writing the memo, right? Like, and some of them are still alive, some of them are very active. For example, I have like Brian Armstrong of Coinbase, doing a memo on how to be a good product manager, right? He wrote it to his PMs at Coinbase, but now a lot of PMs say, I'm like, what were you thinking? Or even go back to Zuck, or go back to somebody at Google, or somebody historically. I want maybe somebody do a book on these memos, but for now I just love it. It's a treat, and I use it all the time.
So another thing that I know you love is LeBron James.
Oh gosh,
let's talk about it. Where does the fascination with LeBron come from, and is he the GOAT?
The fascination with LeBron, yes, he's absolutely the GOAT. The fascination with LeBron comes from the fact that I like to annoy people. I'm a troll. At heart, I'm a troll. I like to annoy people. And so a few years ago, like I live in San Francisco, right? And San Francisco hates LeBron because the Golden State Warriors, were at the peak of their power for many years, and LeBron was, Darth Vader, Voldemort rolled into one. He was the only one.
San Francisco's been spoiled. They did what? They had the
had an era
Giants,
where they had
the baseball. Then they went to the Warriors. Now they got the 49ers, who seem to be doing pretty good. Like,
they had the 49ers with the Colin Kaepernick era. We did really well, and they, there was an age where they had like the Steph Curry, Splash Brothers, Kaepernick. The Giants were doing well. It was an amazing time for San Francisco. But I'm always a bit of to use his overused phrase, a bit of a contrarian, and this was during the 2016 finals. If you remember, the Warriors were up 3-1, and I made a funny post on Facebook. I thought it was funny. I'm like, you know what? I'm pretty sure like LeBron and Cleveland are going to come back and win the series. And by the way, at this time, I was a fan of LeBron, and I'm a fan of him for a few reasons I'll get into, but I just kind of said that. I didn't really mean it. But then, they won, a game 5. And then they famously won game 6 where Steph got ejected. Then he went to game 7. And I was like, oh my gosh, this could be getting real. And then game 7 happens. LeBron chases down, Iguodala, and Kyrie hits a jumper. And I was like, oh my gosh. And my feed exploded. People are so mad at me. And I was like, wait, I now have this thing which is now reliably going to annoy people. And I loved it. So since then, it's kind of become this self-fulfilling prophecy where, where I just love to trot out LeBron because it just annoys the heck out of, all of my, friends and peers in San Francisco. I actually really am a huge fan of LeBron for a bunch of reasons. My biggest reason is I think in any professional career, it is really easy to coast on what made you successful at first, right? Whatever your first thing was, I've seen a lot of people who max out because they were like, I've become as good as I can be. I'm really good at this thing. I'm just going to continue doing this thing. But I think it takes a certain other kind of person to continuously reinvent themselves and to always figure out what the game is and stay out of the game. Like, for example, I think of, my wife always mentions Madonna in this context of always reinventing herself. And if you look at LeBron's always reinvented himself. Like when he came in, he had no jump shot. He was kind of this like, he relied on his speed and athleticism. Went on this personal journey where he went to Miami, was hated because of the decision, learned from that. And then he kind of became this one sort of in the public realm, this lovable figure, working with kids in Akron, kind of becoming a spokesperson for like so many important social causes. On the court, became a leader, changed his game, and he's gotten older. He's kind of like figured out how to play with it. He's always been reinventing himself and staying ahead of the game. Like he's like 35 now, right? And he's still one of the most athletic people in the league. That was not a thing back like 10 years ago. And that can only happen with not natural, gifts. It can only happen when you constantly invent that. So that really inspires me.
So I actually am a huge fan of LeBron, but for a different reason. His dominance on the court is undeniable, right? I'm not going to change anyone's mind. I always talk about like the GOAT argument of like LeBron, Jordan, Kobe, whoever you believe going into the conversation. I'm not going to change your mind. That's who you believe. Knock yourself out. But the thing that is so crazy to me about LeBron is probably the last athlete that started out in an era where social media wasn't really a thing yet. Like, it was just starting, and now continues to play at the highest levels in like this explosion of, basically you can't walk down the street without somebody taking a video of you, right? And so at 16 years old, I think it was, he's on the front cover of Sports Illustrated, Chosen One, all this stuff. 16 years old. How many other kids, Sebastian Telfair, I can go through them all, right? They were all there. They were on the covers, and they all fizzled out.
Right.
So one, he made it, right, in terms of he actually fulfilled the athletic promise. But two is you've never heard drugs, infidelity, doing something wrong, partying.
He's a fantastic role model. I mean, look at him, people don't criticize him for talking about his kids way too much, right? But he's obviously a great dad. He's a great family, but he's such a fantastic role model where it's really hard to be at the peak of your sport and to have, all the adulation, be one of the most recognizable names in like the world. Really, it's very, very remarkable.
And my whole thing is just like that level of scrutiny for now, 20 years, right? So probably 16 to 35, 36 years old. To do that and be one of the best players, if not the best player, in the history of basketball, all this crazy. It's really, really hard to do that. I think that like the average person doesn't understand those types of pressures. I don't understand that type of pressure, right? I don't think there's very many people listening who understand that. But we've seen it over and over and over again. Everyone cracks, right?
They do.
Tiger Woods, Kobe Bryant. I mean, you can just go down the line, right? Conor McGregor recently, like all these guys, they all end up doing something stupid, and some of it is fame goes to their head, some of it's just they make a dumb decision, some of it's they're undisciplined, whatever. LeBron for 20 years has been kind of untouchable, and your biggest critique is hey, he made a decision on live television, donated $1 million to like the Boys and Girls Club. Okay, there could be worse things, right? Or he talks about his kids too much, whatever. So I think it's just pretty cool to see somebody kind of thrive in that environment, and it's kind of hard to hate them.
It is, and I think there's a big lesson for that for like anybody in like any normal job, which is to just reinvent yourself, right? Like, and the game always changes, for some metaphorical definition of the game, and how do you stay ahead of the curve? I think it's true. For example, I talked to a lot of venture capitalists. I was talking to, if you look at some of the great venture capitalists, they've been able to have great hits across many generations. And whatever the original job was, like John Doerr was, a sales VP at Intel, him, help getting Google or picking Google. I don't think being a sales VP at Intel is going to set you up for that. So you obviously kind of have to reinvent yourself, stay ahead of the curve, and to do that over a long period of time. I think LeBron's been able to do it, and that's why he's really inspiring. And he really annoys every one of my friends.
What are you doing now? You're doing a lot more investing in startups?
I'm tweeting.
Okay, tweeting. That's
podcasting.
Good.
There's a lot of that. So I've been doing a lot of investing. So when you have an active day job, you don't get a lot of time, and now I have some free time. I've loved helping young founders and entrepreneurs. So I've been able to do a lot of that. One is doing a lot of investing on the early stage and kind of really helping shape mostly consumer companies, but lots of different companies, which is how to think about product and operations. And second is just to help like other, even like later stage companies with, I call it like my war stories. I'm like, well, I don't know what you guys should do, but like these are the mistakes I've made. So at least please don't repeat the same mistake. So, but it's mostly been investing.
I gotta say that out of everyone that I know or have worked with, you probably, if you cut your experience by the types of companies, the variety at which you worked at the highest levels, and also what you did within those companies, so product, right, ads, etc. There's not very many people who have kind of done that much, right? There's usually like, okay, I do sales, or I do product, I'm a product manager, I work on growth, whatever. And maybe I go to 2-3 companies and do that same thing. But my father told me this one time. He said there's some people who get they work on something for 10 years and they get 2 years of experience 5 times. Right. But it's the same thing 5 different times. And so, it was 10 years, basically get 2 years of experience.
First of all, thank you. That's very kind of you. But second, I mean, I'm not like blowing hot therapy behind. Like, you are the living epitome of doing that. Like, I knew Pomp back in ads at Facebook, and he always stood out because he was one of the smartest, most like, logical thinkers in the room, and also one of the loudest voices, like literally, but he's one of the smartest, most logical thinkers. And, I've kind of seen you reinvent yourself where, well, to Bitcoin never sleeps guy. I never stop making fun of you for that. So I think you're the living epitome, like, and across industries. So yeah, I mean, thank you, but I think you're way ahead of me there.
Yeah, well, I think that you follow something similar that I do of just like, it's where does your interest take you, right? And it all leads back to kind of this authenticity thing of, I think a lot of people, the joke of that, like, you have 10 years, but it's really 2 years of experience 5 times, is those people tend to just do what they think they're supposed to do, right? So it's like, I'm supposed to go to do this, and then I wait 2 years, then I go do this, and then after that, I join a venture capital firm as a principal, and then I do this. And it's like their whole life, they already have like scripted out. And I've always just been like, well, like, what if I don't want to do that? Right? Like, what if this other thing is more interesting, or that, whatever. And it's like the whole, I have a master plan. It ends up being hard.
Let me turn the tables. But like, if you are a young person, right,
Yep.
and you are, for example, I think the path is you get a job, maybe you have a B school degree,
Yep.
you get if you get a B school degree, then you come in, you rise up the corporate ranks, or the Silicon Valley way, which is you become a founder and you start something, but you don't want to. How do you know what your path should be?
So
let's say somebody listening to you is in the middle of a company.
Yeah, so I actually think the best thing that somebody can do, and there's a couple of kids, I don't want to use their names because I don't know if they'd be comfortable with me, but there's a couple of kids that I know that range in age between, I'll say they're probably 20 to 25, right? So they're either should be in college and they didn't go for whatever reason, or they're just out of school. And they're all executing this very, very well. But basically what I tell them when I see them doing this is like, look, go find people that need help, whether they realize it or not, and be overly helpful. But don't go find the person that's at, the entry-level employee at some company. Go and talk directly to the CEOs of startups and go talk to the partners at these investment firms. And they always say the same thing, like, oh, like that person doesn't want to talk. Why do they want to talk to me? I'm 23 years old, right? And I say, well, they're going to want to talk to you for one of two reasons. Either they think that you've got really unique insights, or two, that you can do something to help them.
Right.
And what I think that the people who I've seen do this really well is they realize Twitter's a great tool. You can reach out to anyone, right? LinkedIn, writing online. Like, there's all these little hacks that you can do, but very quickly, like David Perel's a great example. He wrote online a bunch. Everyone started, one person read it, was like, that's interesting. Another person read it, and they shared it. And next thing everyone knows, everyone looks over and goes, oh yeah, that dude's smart. Like, he gets a certain part of the world that most of us don't think about all day long. Like, that's great. I'll mention another person. This is not a young person, I don't think, and so don't get mad. I've never met him in person. But Matthew Ball, I don't know if you know who
I
this
love
is.
Matthew.
Unbelievable. So he just left Amazon Studios,
Yes.
I believe.
His newsletter, if you folks haven't subscribed, they should. He's a fantastic. I've known him for years.
Oh, have you? Okay,
Yeah.
so I only in the last 2 to 3 months started seeing his stuff. I don't think I've read something that he's written that I wasn't like, holy shit, this dude is smart, right? And he's just analyzing everything from Disney Plus to media models, like all this stuff. And you're just sitting there and you're just like, I cannot believe that this content is on the internet for free. Like, you can learn anything. And so I even think that there's people who are really good at let me go find information, let me consume it and put it in my brain, and then turn around and regurgitate it back to somebody else, right? And if you're good at doing that and synthesizing those, Matthew's 20-page write-up, and then turning around and helping a media CEO put it into practice, that person's probably going to think that you're smart.
I have so many thoughts on this. I think first is, I think a lot of people actually make fun of me for writing, because inside of a large company, or you're a position of power, it's not obvious why you want to tweet or why you want to write. You're like, why are you wasting this time? But it's such a real superpower when you write, because it pays off in these non-linear ways that you never really understand. One, you're able to help people, finding great people in so many ways. So, for example, a lot of people come ask me, I want to get into product management, and I don't have either, the right background. I'm in a different role, and how do I get in? Do I just apply, cold to this company? And chances are, if you apply cold, nobody's going to look at you, because some resume, you're going to get screened, and not because they're terrible people. They only have finite amount of time, and if someone's not been doing product management, you just don't have enough time to go through every single person. Now, I always tell them the exact same thing, which is, there's one sure way to get every head of product or CEO's attention, which is you write a doc or a set of tweets, you talk to them about the biggest things their company or the product should be focusing on, they're not doing, write a strategy memo or write mocks, do whatever it is that you're good at, and just send it to them, or tweet it. Even better, tweet it. And I guarantee you, the CEO, the founder, the head of product, they will reach out to you and they will grab coffee.
They'll be super impressed that somebody's critically thinking about their business.
Right. Yeah, and honestly, they read it and they share it every single time. And I know I was talking to somebody who wanted to break into a company, and this person, he had like no background in tech, no computer science background, and it is really challenging to break into product management when you don't have that. But he wrote this memo, this really hot startups founder saw that memo and got him in, and he now has like a product role. So wow. That's what I think. And I'm not saying you need to do it just because you get a job, though it's actually a really way to go get a job and have a portfolio. I think it really pays off in these non-linear ways, which are unintuitive, which is why like I recommend everyone write online, be it a tweet, a newsletter, a blog. It's a living portfolio of your work, and it's going to pay off for you.
Yeah. It's why Twitter, I think, is so powerful, is because it's kind of like reading somebody's conscious stream of thoughts, right? It's like, what is that person thinking about today? Paulina usually gives me a hard time. She says there's times where like we'll have a conversation and 20 minutes later she sees me tweet something and she's like, are you subtweeting me?
Yes,
right?
I have the same, Aarti, she's like, yeah, I get the same thing.
Right. And it's not always about like your relationship or her. It just might be a conversation that we had, and she's like, "Hey, like tag me next time." Yeah. Right.
First of all, both of us need to start doing that. But I think there is a certain. I think one of the things people find really hard about Twitter is I think the best tweeters are on this efficient frontier of being vulnerable, but also not doing something that'll blow up their career. Like Jared Diamond, who wrote Gun Jump, has this fantastic analogy of like a civilization which is too chaotic falls over a cliff. But if you're not changing enough, you get stale and you die. And I think the best tweets are something like that, where, if you're not vulnerable, if you're not open to people criticizing you or giving you tough feedback, you'll never post anything interesting. Which is why, like so many people, who just post press releases or or are so scripted are not interesting people to follow. But on the other hand, it's so easy to blow up your whole career using Twitter, and you need to find what I call that edge. The edge is magical. Like Nawal, for example, one of the best people I've found who's found that edge. And there's something in it takes some courage, because it's such an unnatural thing to be somewhat vulnerable, and you're going to get a lot of flack for it. Your friends are going to tell you, why are you doing this? It's an obviously stupid idea. A lot of random strangers on the internet definitely going to tell you it's a bad idea. But there's something magical about putting out your ideas, knowing they're going to be wrong, but getting feedback and getting the smartest people to talk to them. Because when you do that, when you share these ideas, it kind of pays off. You find these smart people who come back to you and you gravitate towards you, and you build these communities over time. And that's something magical. So
you attract like-minded people.
Yes. And you form these connections which you never can. And Twitter, by the way, is amazing for that. Twitter is the best place to meet like-minded people around pretty much any community. Like, for example, I recently started tweeting. I got interested in spy satellites. It turns out that there is an active sub-community of people who are on the world, amateur astronomers, or I don't know what the term is, but they track spy satellites. So, for example,
so they're tracking the spy satellites to try to understand where they're positioned in the world.
In fact, they already know where all the positions are because they can track all the launches. So, for example, there's this guy, and I actually posted a link in my recent newsletter. Do you remember when President Trump posted this photo of this Iranian reactor blown up? This guy, who's this Dutch professor, he doesn't have a day job connected to satellites. Just using that photo and the angle of the sun, computed which satellite it was, and it was a previously unknown satellite. And second, that it had an imaging sensor that the US had never admitted to. And he just does it using just the photo. And there's this amazing blog post, where he breaks the math of like trying to analyze the sun's angle and the trajectory of the Earth. It's amazing. And so you have these weird, kind of eccentric set of people around the world who do this, and they put up these little cameras on their porches at night which track satellites as they pass by, and they're like, well, do I know this thing, and they share. And there's this email list which I joined for a period of time, then it got very nerdy, where they share this information. And it's this really, let's be clear, it's a very nerdy niche activity, but it's also fascinating. It turns out that from your backyard, you can track pretty much any spy satellite from any government, which I didn't even know about. And I found all these people on Twitter. I know follow all of them. I now have a list of people who are all into tracking spy satellites. And you're like, where would you find that? Like, where would you find that group of people if not on Twitter? And it only happened because I put out this tweet about this Trump photo, and then somebody else had replied, added someone else, and then it kind of became a thing.
Speaking of satellites, believer or non-believer in aliens?
I'll answer this in a different way.
Okay.
People ask me a question, which is, what are things that I've changed my mind on?
Okay.
Yep. And my top answer is always, when I was a kid and until 5 years ago, I believed that meeting aliens was a good thing. I know meeting aliens is a terrible thing.
Okay, why?
And very early in life, do you have like one book or one moment where you know that changed your mind? But I have this, which is I'm going to butcher his name. Cixin Liu, who is one of the most famous, one of the most awesome sci-fi writers of our time, wrote this Chinese sci-fi novel called The Three-Body Problem. It's now a trilogy.
The Three-Body Problem. Okay.
Yes, it's now this very famous trilogy. It's probably one of the most famous literary works to come out of China in the last 10 years. It's definitely the most well-known work of sci-fi in the last like 5-10 years. And I don't want to spoil it, but this trilogy roughly deals with humanity running into an alien race. Can we nerd out about this for a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
So just so you have context, on the podcast, this all started because I used to ask if there's such thing as alien pets. So we always think about alien like a race, right? But we never think about, well, like, are there multi-species? So like, are there pets and stuff? So that kicked off the whole aliens thing. I've had 200 plus people answer the question, all kinds of crazy shit. And I think you are now only the second or third guest ever to basically pontificate about, wait a minute, every single person in the human race that has been invaded hasn't turned out well. Like pretty much across the board, the invader usually has a significant advantage.
So this book, by the way,
so it sounds like that's kind of what you're talking about.
A little bit. So the trilogy basically says there's a theory, and it's called the Dark Forest theory.
The Dark Forest theory.
Yeah,
okay.
and I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to give it just, but the rough contours of it is, space is so vast and communication takes so long, and you have so little context when you're communicating, that you can't assume good intentions. So, for example, I'm sure I'm butchering this, and I'm sure your listeners are going to point this out. But my interpretation of it is, we often sometimes think, look, alien races are going to be so evolved that they're not going to harm us. They're going to be beyond like warfare, etc. I think what the book makes a very convincing argument for is alien races can't trust each other because of the very nature of space. So the safest thing to do is to never being spotted by another alien race, and the more you spot them is to try and destroy them. And the book is fantastic. There's a reason why it's one of the most famous sci-fi works of recent time. It really reasons this out of why it's, from a game theory perspective, it's the smartest thing to do. And so that kind of changed my mind, where when I was a kid, I loved sci-fi. One of my favorite works of all time is Carl Sagan's Contact. The SETI program, I used to obsess over that. I loved sci-fi. But now, I'm like, sending, these probes into space, which have like basically a homing beacon on humanity, is like maybe one of the most reckless things we've ever done. And by the way, I'm sure a bunch of your listeners are like, oh my God, there's somebody nerdy geeking out. I just go read the book. There is a very well thought out game theory perspective on why it's a bad thing. It's called the Dark Forest Problem. The book is called the Three-Body Problem.
Three-Body Problem has the Dark Forest theory.
The Dark Forest theory.
Okay. Before I let you go, you could ask me one question, but first, what's your thoughts on Bitcoin? We're supposed to talk about Bitcoin, but we're going to spend the last 5 minutes talking about that.
I heard it sleeps and naps a lot. Is that true?
To be honest, so the first time I ever tweeted this was like, I don't know, some bank was down or what, something happened, or Instagram went down or something, and I was like, Bitcoin never goes down. It was probably one of the least thoughtful things I've ever tweeted, in the sense of like, it was a thought that popped in my head. It was kind of like half funny but true and whatever. Fired it off. I put my phone down. I remember I like came back and was like, oh my God, people, like, that one really worked. So I did it a second time. I think like by the third or fourth time I did it, then it like became a thing. Right? It's like this kind of like repetition becomes a thing. And I forget what it might have been Twitter. No, it could have been Twitter. Maybe it was Instagram again. Like something went down. This is maybe like 4 or 5 months later. And I didn't tweet. And I had all of these people like tweeting constantly, like, Pomp, something's down. And I was like, all right, this is getting out of hand now. And so it just like became this thing, which is like, it kind of is like the meme is the message, right? But
very Marshall McLuhan.
Yeah, of course. Well, exactly.
Which any Facebook employee gets to learn about on day one.
I I think people are surprised at the books that they're given. I remember, was it Sam Lesson? I think he gives out Snow Crash.
Snow Crash is a big deal. Cox was very much into McLuhan. And the media is the message.
Yep.
The medium is the message, rather.
Yeah. And there was one other one, but those are the two that I remember.
I think Ready Player One is very big on the VR AR side for sure. Okay. One question for you.
Wait, no, hold on. What do you think about Bitcoin?
What do you think about Bitcoin? Well, I am, there's...
Can't avoid that question.
Oh, gosh. You promised me no crypto questions,
Joe's smirking in the corner, so you definitely can't avoid it.
Well, I have, a not insignificant percentage of my net worth in, Bitcoin. I'm hodling,
Nicely, okay.
So
That's a start.
It's a start. When I had free time in past years, I dabbled. I wrote my own Solidity apps. I wrote kind of the first generation of dApps. I even traded on many shady, Asian trading sites, which I now can't seem to get login back into. Well, what do I think? Let me kind of lend a personal twist to this. So I have a mom back in India. She lives in Chennai. And every few months.
Sorry, I'm laughing because you said I have a mom. We all do. Okay,
sorry,
go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and she's a little bit older now, and and your Indian viewers would really appreciate this. Like any good Indian child, I try and send money back every once in a while.
Yep.
And it is a painful process. Like I go through this arcane, very well-known companies with these arcane set of UI with a crazy rate, and it often fails for some weird reasons. And I just think there's something very powerful about changing and reinventing and decentralizing all that. So and look, I am not, a crypto libertarian. I definitely very interested from a technology angle. I love, for example, when Vitalik wrote the State of Crypto a few weeks ago, I went under every single paper, he was referring to in there. But I think I come back to, why should Facebook's Libra exist? Or what is the promise of Bitcoin? I come back why is it so hard to send money to my mom, right? Because India and US are both very civilized countries with sort of this financial infrastructure. But for me to even send a small amount of money is hard. It has so much friction. And then she, she's almost 80 now. She kind of has to figure out, well, how do I then convert into actual money, which she can then go spend on, which sometimes she can't figure it out. So anything which, and those barriers shouldn't exist. And anything which can help with that, I think so powerful for my mom.
You are hitting on something that I think the whole crypto community has done a really bad job of, actually. And if you think about a great startup pitch, what do they start with?
The story.
Here's the state of the world, right? And this thing is going to happen, and here's how it's going to look in the future. I think that crypto, for the most part, not this isn't true in every sense, but in most part, people like to go to, there's this thing, and we're going to change the world. But explaining what you just did about, here's a real life problem that people have, we can fix this problem with this product, right? And here's how that'll change. I think that's been missing a little bit. I actually think that companies that have been started in the last 3 or 4 years are doing a much better job of doing it. Some of that's because you get people who have more experience in kind of the tech world and building companies, et cetera. But they're being teamed up with people who are very much crypto libertarian, and that type of.
I'll give you an example. I listened to your podcast with Brad Garlinghouse of Ripple.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, his memo, fantastic. Also on my side, I heard.
Does he have a good one?
He mentioned it on the podcast, the peanut butter memo
from
his time at Yahoo.
Yes.
Legendary memo. But there's something else he said on your podcast which was super interesting, where he said he often sits in these conferences and you hear, and look, I am a computer science engineer by background. I used to write Paxos algorithms, so anything which is about consensus, I love all this stuff, right? But he was talking about when he sits in this conference and he's like, but what is the actual problem you're trying to solve? Which often to an outsider seems like some business or management speak, but I like to think about back in human terms. I want to send, let's say, Bitcoin to my mom. How do I do that? How would she understand it? How would she actually spend it at the local store, around the corner she has? How does all of this work? But that's a real problem, because I know it's how hard it is for me to do that right now with the current financial infrastructure. I would love for Bitcoin to make that better.
Yeah. Look, I think it's going to happen at some point, right? I think it already, let me rephrase. I think it already is in some aspects. So on Saturday, it won't settle. Bitcoin will do it, right? So kind of it's always up, right? There's lower fees, right? Okay, that's great. But again, is the UI perfect? No. Can there be improvements? Of course, right? Is there an education kind of obstacle for people just to understand what is this? How do I transact it?
Of course, you have these. India, for example, is a very weird place with crypto right now. So,
is it legal?
Exactly, right?
I mean, it's super simple questions.
I'm going to get arrested when I talk about this next time I go into India. So, I think you have all these incumbents, who are trying to figure what you do with this. Some countries, obviously, you have the Chinese government who are leaned in. Others are well, we want to take a wait and see approach. Yep. So that's another huge factor.
Yeah. What one question you have for me? It's a lot of fun, man.
Oh my, thank you. I want to think of a good one. I'm struggling. Okay. Okay. At this point in 2020, do you think
we're 16 days in or 20 days in?
Two questions. Who do you want Nakamoto to be? And do you think the world should ever find out their identity?
So, I don't even know if this is controversial anymore. I don't want to know, and I think that one of the strongest parts of Bitcoin is that we don't know and we'll likely never know. Mm-hmm. And the reason
that's just because it's you, right?
No, I'm not.
You hold the keys to the Genesis
I don't
block.
even have 1% of the intelligence of 1% of the intelligence required to create something like that.
He winked at me. You can't hear it on the podcast, but he winked at me.
I can't even figure out how to make my cell phone work in the office because we don't have good cell service. Definitely not figuring that out. No, but it's this idea. I think it was Marty Bent was the first one that I heard say the Immaculate Conception, right? And so if you think of if you really boil down what is money, money's a religion, right? Mm-hmm. And that religion is the belief that when I hand you whatever the currency is, whether it's a digital currency or physical currency, whether it's fiat, Bitcoin, whatever, you accept it because you and I both believe it has value, right? Now, when you look at why does it have value, there's a whole bunch of explanations, whatever. But when you think about that, there's not very many successful religions, meaning that there's people who subscribe to it in the world where there's a single person that is alive that everyone looks at and says, that's the leader, right? Now, there's the kind of extremist type, the people who end up all drinking stuff and mass suicide, or all that kind of crazy stuff, right? But a quote unquote legitimate, and I don't even know if that's the proper way to describe it, but a mainstream religion where the person is still alive who's considered the leader. If you look at fiat currencies, there's no single leader, right? Now, there's, in many cases, a central bank. That central bank, the leadership switches out every so often, et cetera. But no one thinks about, who's the creator of the U.S. dollar, right? It's more of this, facade of an organization that you can't really touch or feel. Bitcoin has the same thing. And I think that if it lost that, right, because it became very apparent and verifiable, this is the individual who is Satoshi Nakamoto, or the group, especially if they're still alive, a lot of kind of that magic goes away. Yeah. And so I don't think that it's necessarily a fatal flaw, but it definitely causes some problems and challenges. What I don't know is there's a lot of people who think Hal Finney is Satoshi Nakamoto. Yeah. Hal Finney's passed away. So okay, maybe that still has some of the magic because he's passed away, right? But I don't really know. And so generally,
do you think it matters at this point?
Again, if the person's alive, I think it does, right? Not in the sense of all of a sudden Bitcoin's worthless, but it's Vitalik has it with
LeBron James.
Ethereum.
What if that person's out there,
Well, Vitalik has it with Ethereum, right? Vitalik spends a lot of time answering questions about Ethereum's progress, even though Vitalik he's incredibly important. He's obviously the creator, if not a creator. But it's not only up to Vitalik in terms of he's not writing all the code, right? There's a bunch of other people.
Vitalik is interesting because he's such a good spokesperson and symbol. Just one of the smartest people that you can ever encounter. Yep. What if he was somebody who was getting into scandals all the time? Going back to a LeBron example,
huge problem.
What he was on TMZ, after a bender every single night, it would probably impact Ethereum.
Absolutely.
But I'm just laughing because I just imagine Vitalik doing it.
Well, and he's I mean, it's a little weird, right, to describe it this way, but he's not a mythical type figure, but people realize that he's different, right? He's obviously incredibly intelligent. The intellectual horsepower that he has is bar none compared to most people. He wears the unicorn shirts and just his whole mannerisms. You can just tell hey, that guy's different, right? And so if you take that to Bitcoin, like I think that it's just you're 11 years in now, right? So you kind of take it away. The part that I do think would be fatal is if it came out that it was a government organization. So if that was
I think it's very unlikely though, given for them to be on the cypherpunk email list back then,
there's crazier shit that's happened, right?
Fair enough.
The world is crazy, but I think that it's again verifiable. So not the conspiracy theories, not the like, hey, I stitched together all these photos and like made a YouTube video and edited it somehow to make it look like something happened.
If it's on YouTube, it's true.
Yeah, very true in today's day and age. But like, it was verifiable that it was an organization, associated with the government, etc. I think that would be a big issue and potentially fatal. But the other piece of this actually that's really interesting to me is at what level of penetration in the ownership can be known without it being an issue. So like, forget the creator, take the top 10 holders of Bitcoin. I don't know how many are known, but let's say 5 or 6 probably. Well, do we care that we don't know the other 4? What about out of the top 20, the top 30, the top 50, right? Like, if you're in the top 20 holders of Bitcoin, like you're probably holding more than 100,000 Bitcoin, like pretty big number, right? And so like the whole ethos of Bitcoin would be that we don't ever find out who those people are. But like if that becomes, publicized, there's some people or organizations like we'd be like, oh shit, like that's bad, right? Not bad because the asset's bad, but just like, I see now that there's going to be people who are upset that person owns a lot of this, right?
Right.
And so I think that there's kind of like various levels of
That's fascinating
of thought process here. But again, like I always fall back then on like I have this theory in startups of like it's what is it? I think it's the law of energy. I don't know. I'm going to embarrass myself right now. But basically, things that are in motion stay in motion. Things that aren't in motion, don't. And startups are very similar. Like if you find a startup and they have traction and data points and like progress and like it's very clear this isn't just like, hey, we had a bunch of ad spend, but like it's working.
Right.
It's likely that it's going to continue working, right? For the most part. If something is like stagnant and they can't seem to like get that inflection point, every day that goes by gets harder and harder to like all of a sudden now it starts working. And so I think that Bitcoin probably more than anything has benefited from this because it's like 11 years of being attacked in the media and technology and all these different things. Like it's still going. It's likely that it's going to keep going regardless of what we throw at it, including, who the holders are or whatever. But
it's like
I don't know.
It's like reflexive in the George Soros sense, right? It creates this momentum.
And I think all of these intricacies and kind of complex questions are like why people are so fascinated with it.
Yep.
Right? Like if you like to think about kind of these multidimensional problems, Bitcoin's like the perfect thing, right? You're like, oh, wow, there's the economic part, there's the technology part, there's like the government and geopolitical components, there's, all sorts of game theory involved and economics. And it's like, Jesus Christ, like how you can't possibly think through everything. Like you can't understand it fully. And so there's always something new to learn, which I think is fun.
Well, that's why they should subscribe to you.
I do enough shilling of people to subscribe to me and follow me on Twitter. I have one last question for you. I usually don't ask people this.
Oh, oh my gosh.
But you have a 1-year-old.
Yes.
What is the one thing that you've learned as a new father? Like, what's your one takeaway from a year of having a little human to take care of?
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's a really hard question.
Out of all the questions, this is the hard one?
That's a really hard question. Okay, I think one is, it's hard because I think it turns out that all the classical, sometimes pithy answers are true. I think it's so dependent on your unique experience, and it's also so profound that it's hard to sum up in just like a few words because such a profound experience in so many ways. What can I say? So I think that, okay, I don't know whether this sums it up, but I think one of the things which always strikes me about being a dad is it's not often, and I'm going to sound somewhat sentimental and romantic here, and I'm sure your viewers can feel free to roll their eyes. It's not often in life that you suddenly have someone that you're like, oh my gosh, I love this person without like expecting anything, without any transactional return. Now, if for a lot of us, and your parents, you kind of did that, you had that relationship as a kid. But often, when you find a partner and you're lucky enough, it's like it happens over time. Like nobody, and maybe you're very lucky, but like on day one, you're like, oh, I'm going to marry this person and that's it. You don't have that. But when you have this child, like one is like immediately your heart and your sense of who you are expands. Like I never thought of myself as a dad or somebody who loved someone that way, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm now this person. You always had in you. So and I'm sure other fathers listening or parents listening to this will definitely relate to that. It's really hard to explain it. It's one of these annoying things where people would tell me this before and I was like, yes, I don't get it, but once you kind of get it on the other side, that's one. Second, I think, which is kind of interesting to me, is it puts you in touch with your own childhood. So every single day, I now remember something I never did. Either it's something my own parents did with me or something. Like I remember, like when I was a kid, when I was maybe about 2, I used to love playing with chairs. It was a silly thing. Every kid has their own thing. I used to love pretend that a chair is a train, a bus, or a plane. I used to love playing with chairs. And when I see, my daughter who just turned 1 do this, I'm like, this something takes me back in my mind, and something I never remembered now because you don't have really crystal memories. I don't remember this, so it kind of makes you relive your own life, and maybe a part of your life you've forgotten, which is sub 4 years, sub 5 years, and you don't remember this, and you don't kind of understand your own parents better. There's kind of this cliche thing, like you become your own parents over time. You don't understand your parents a lot better, so that's kind of unexpected for me because I definitely expected in some ways that it's going to open up this new set of experiences, and you got how you deal with this tiny human being and their how to kind of protect them in this crazy world we live in. But the thing which I didn't expect was it helps you understand yourself and your own story and all these experiences you might have just forgotten. So that's been very unexpected for me. I don't know whether it answers your question.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. All right, listen, this might be the most fun I've had in a while.
This was so much fun.
I appreciate it. Thank you for coming to do it.
Thanks for having me. This was so much fun.
SriramK.com and SriramK at SriramK on Twitter.
That is right.
But not the other Sriram.
Oh, not the other one. That person's evil. We should not talk of him.
All right, man. We're going to do this again. I appreciate it.
Thank you. This is so much fun. Thanks for having me.